Vampire King never kneels, not for his enemies, and certainly not for a servant girl who spilled his wine. But when King Emerich dropped to his knees to claim Wren before his entire court, he broke an ancient law and ignited a deadly conspiracy hidden behind gentle smiles. The wine cup was still spinning on the floor when the guard's blade found her throat. Wren didn't scream. She watched the wine instead, tracing red into the seam between two flagstones, and thought, absurdly, that someone would have to clean that up. Then a hand closed over the guard's wrist. The blade vanished, and the king of the realm of Nilspire was on his knees in front of a servant girl, in front of his entire court, while the hall of Sepulchretop forgot how to breathe.
Touch her again, and I will forget which of us is expected to show restraint tonight.
He didn't look at the guard when he said it. He looked at her. And that, more than the blade, more than the wine, was the part the court would never forgive. Wren woke to candlelight that did not flicker the way candlelight should, steady as something that had learned not to be afraid of drafts. The ceiling above her was carved stone, vaulted higher than any room she had ever slept beneath. And for one long moment she simply lay there cataloging the wrongness of it. The sheets, too fine for a servant's hands, the silence too complete for a servant's quarters, the ache low in her throat that felt less like a bruise and more like a signature. She pressed 2 fingers there before she meant to. 2 small marks already closing, already hers. The realm of Nilspire had one law above every other law, and Hesper had told it to her on her first night scrubbing floors in Sepulchretop, half as warning and half as court gossip. A vampire king did not kneel. Not for allies, not for enemies. Not under any circumstance anyone could remember for a servant girl carrying his wine. He had knelt anyway. If this is the kind of story that gets its hooks into you before the first chapter is even finished, the kind where you already want to know what he's going to do about a court that will never let this go, stay through it with me. Subscribe so you don't lose the thread. Like it if his knees on that floor did something to you they probably shouldn't have, and tell me in the comments whether you think a king who kneels once ever really stops. The door opened without a knock. Only servants did that, and only for each other. And Hesper slipped inside with a basin of water she didn't seem to know what to do with.
You're awake? Good. Nobody told me if you were allowed to be awake, so I brought water either way.
Hesper, what happened?
You mean besides the king of the realm of Nilspire getting down on both knees in front of 40 nobles and half the Sableridge Wilds delegation? Besides that?
Hesper.
He claimed you. In front of everyone. That's what happened. There isn't a gentler way to say it.
Wren's hand found her throat again.
He didn't ask me.
No, kings don't, usually. Though I'll say this, I've served in this court 8 years, and I've never once seen him ask anyone anything he didn't already intend to hear yes to.
I've been here 2 seasons, Hesper. I know how to carry a wine tray without spilling it. I don't know how to be claimed by a king.
Nobody does. That's rather the point of it being the king. There's no one above him to teach him better manners, and no one below him brave enough to try.
Wren let her head fall back against the pillow, staring up at stone that had stood. Hesper had told her once, since before the realm of Nelspire had a name anyone still remembered. Sepulchretop hadn't been built to be lived in so much as endured. Narrow windows, thick walls, a castle designed by people who had once needed to survive something the current court had long since forgotten the shape of. Wren had come to it the way most servants did, an orphan of the chill market famine years with nowhere better to be, grateful for a roof and a wage and the simple mercy of being unremarkable. Unremarkable had lasted 2 seasons. It had ended, apparently, in one evening, over a spilled cup of wine and a blade she still felt against her throat when she closed her eyes too quickly.
For what it's worth, I don't think he did it lightly. I've poured his wine longer than you have. I've never seen him so much as glance at a servant twice, let alone kneel for one in front of the entire Ebonite Confederacy's delegation. Whatever this is, it isn't nothing to him.
That's supposed to comfort me?
It's supposed to be honest. I'm fresh out of comforting.
By the time Wren was strong enough to walk the halls without his spare's hand at her elbow, the court had already decided what it thought of her, and none of it needed to be said aloud for her to feel it in the pause before a door was held open, in the too careful courtesy of servants who outranked her yesterday and now weren't sure if they still did. She found Emerich in the map room, the one with the window that looked over all of the realm of Nelspire's northern border, arguing with a man whose voice never rose above a murmur and somehow filled the room anyway. The map room smelled of old parchment and older candle wax. The walls lined floor to ceiling with borders that had shifted 100 times over and been redrawn 100 times more. Kendrick stood near the window with his hands folded behind his back, dressed in the plain dark wool the court's senior advisors favored. Nothing about him marking him as dangerous, which was, Wren was beginning to suspect, exactly the point.
I'm not questioning your right to claim her, my king. I would never presume that. I'm only asking you to consider what the Ebonite Confederacy's ambassador saw last night and what he'll report home, and what that report will cost us at a border already thinner than either of us would like.
Say what you actually mean, Kendrick.
I mean that I have spent 30 years keeping this court from mistaking your temper for policy. I would rather not start losing that fight now, over a girl who was pouring your wine a fortnight ago.
Wren stopped in the doorway unseen, or perhaps simply unimportant enough not to be noticed. Kendrick's tone never sharpened. That was, she would come to understand, the whole art of him. He could deliver a knife with the same gentleness he'd use to hand someone a cup of tea, and everyone in the room would thank him for his care.
The girl has a name.
Of course, forgive me. Wren, then. I only want what's best for you both, truly, and what's best right now is quiet. Let the court's memories soften. Let the ambassador's report grow stale before it reaches home. I'm not asking you to undo what's done, only to be patient about how loudly we let the realm know it.
It was, Wren thought, a reasonable thing to ask. That was what unsettled her about it. What Wren didn't see, what no one in the map room saw because Kendrick had spent 30 years making sure no one ever looked at him closely enough to catch it, was the flicker of satisfaction that crossed his face the moment Emerich turned away. Not anger, not offense at being contradicted. Satisfaction, quiet and complete, like a man watching a plan unfold exactly as he'd shaped it. Later, alone with her in the corridor outside, Emerich pressed his palm briefly against the wall beside her head, not trapping her, just close, the way a man might lean against a doorway out of habit rather than intention.
Kendrick isn't wrong that the court needs managing. He's rarely wrong about anything. It's one of the reasons I've trusted him longer than I've trusted almost anyone still breathing in this castle.
You say that like it worries you.
Everything about the last day worries me, you least of all, and that's the part I haven't worked out yet.
He didn't elaborate. He never did, not fully. She was learning that about him the way she was learning the ache at her throat, in small increments that added up to something she didn't yet have a word for. She thought, walking away, that she should have felt reassured. Kendrick had defended her in his fashion. Emerich trusted him. There was no reason for the small, cold knot sitting beneath her ribs, no evidence for it at all. Only the memory of a man delivering a knife with a teacup's gentleness, and the strange, persistent sense that somewhere in that gentle voice she had been discussed like a border dispute rather than a person. Bignia found her 3 days later in the low archive where the servants weren't forbidden exactly, only discouraged, and where Wren had taken to hiding when the court's stares grew too loud to bear even in silence. He was the oldest vampire she had ever stood near, old enough that Hesper swore his age wasn't counted in years anymore but in kingdoms, how many had risen and fallen since he was made. He didn't look it. He looked instead like a man who had simply stopped being surprised by anything a very long time ago.
You should know what you are now before someone less kind explains it to you.
I know what I am. I'm the servant the king knelt for.
You're a claim made without ritual, without coven witness, and without the 7 days of formal courtship the realm of Nelspire's law requires before a king may mark anyone at all. Emerich broke that law in front of every noble house present, which means every noble house present now has grounds to challenge it. And him.
Wren set down the book she hadn't really been reading.
Then why hasn't anyone challenged it yet?
Because he's still strong enough that nobody wants to be first. That won't last. It never does. Someone will decide the risk is worth it. Lubomira, maybe. Or worse, someone Kendrick has quietly convinced it's their idea.
You don't trust him, Kendrick.
I've trusted Kendrick for longer than you've been alive, girl, and I'll go on trusting him until the day I have a real reason not to. I only notice now that I've started watching for one. That's new. I don't love that it's new.
What does coven witness even mean? Sibignu, nobody has explained any of this to me. I've been told I broke a law I didn't know existed by a man I never agreed to belong to in front of people who apparently get to decide whether I'm allowed to keep existing here.
It means elders of standing must observe the courtship and attest to it before the coven's memory. Not for ceremony's sake, but because a claim made in secret has historically been a claim made by force, and the coven learned that lesson badly enough, centuries ago, that it wrote the law in blood rather than ink. Emerich knows this better than anyone in this castle, which is precisely why what he did troubles people more than it would if some minor lordling had done the same.
You're saying he knew exactly what he was breaking.
I'm saying a king who has upheld a law without exception for longer than your country has existed does not forget it exists in a moment of temper. He chose to break it. That should frighten you considerably less than it should make you curious what frightened him worse, the guard's blade, or losing you to it.
She found Emerich that evening in the Western Gallery. Where he went, she was starting to notice whenever the weight of ruling grew heavier than usual. He didn't turn when she approached, though she was certain he'd heard her.
You've been talking to Zebignew.
You knew before I said anything.
I could smell the archive dust on you from the hallway. Vampire senses aren't subtle, Wren. They're just old.
She stepped closer without meaning to, close enough that she felt, rather than saw, the change in him. His shoulders went still in a way that wasn't calm. His eyes, when they found hers, had gone a shade darker than she remembered them being that morning. The air between them seemed to thicken, warm where it should have been cool, and beneath it all she could feel her own pulse announcing itself at her throat like something eager to be heard.
You should step back.
Why?
Because your pulse is loud tonight, and I have had a very long, very frustrating day, and my control is a finite resource I would rather not spend proving to you right now.
She stepped back. He exhaled something that wasn't quite relief.
8 days since I last fed properly. I can manage 8 days standing still. I'm considerably less certain about 8 days standing near you.
It was the first time he'd said it plainly. The hunger, named instead of hidden behind a king's composure, and something in Wren wanted, absurdly, to move closer instead of further away. Lubomira found her in a corridor 2 days later, which was, Wren was learning, precisely how the court preferred its confrontations. Not summoned, not announced. Simply arranged to look accidental.
Walk with me. It isn't a request, though I'll dress it as one for the sake of pretending we're equals.
Lubomira was court nobility down to the set of her spine. from a house old enough to remember when the realm of Nelspire's borders touched the Wolfhaven empires without a treaty between them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to.
Do you understand what a formal courtship looks like in this court? The 7 days of witnessed ritual you skipped entirely?
I didn't skip anything. I wasn't asked.
No, you weren't. Which is precisely the problem, and precisely why half this castle is deciding, this week, whether that makes you a victim worth protecting or a convenience worth removing. I'd suggest you care very much which conclusion they reach.
Is that a warning or a threat?
It's an observation. What you do with it is entirely yours. I am not your enemy, Wren. I would like that understood early, before you decide otherwise out of habit. I am, however, someone who has watched 3 unlawful claims end badly inside this court in my lifetime, and none of the girls involved got to choose how badly.
You say that like you watched closely.
My own cousin was the second of the 3.
Claimed without ritual, by a lord who lost interest before the season turned, and by then the coven no longer recognized her as anything. Not claimed, not free, not quite either. She spent the rest of her life somewhere between the two. And nobody at this court remembers her name anymore. I remember it. I intend to keep remembering it, which is why I'm standing in this corridor telling a servant girl things I have no obligation to tell her.
Why does it matter to you what happens to me?
It doesn't, particularly. What matters to me is what happens to this court when it lets a king believe the law bends for him, simply because he's strong enough that no one will say otherwise. You're a symptom, Wren. I'd rather treat the symptom kindly than let the disease run its course unchecked, if it's all the same to you.
She left Wren standing alone in the corridor with the particular kind of dread that comes from being told the truth by someone with no reason to lie about it. Isn't that always the moment that costs the most? Not the enemy's threat, but the ally's honest warning, the one you can't afford to dismiss because nothing in it was actually wrong? Wren thought about Kendrick's gentle patience and Lubomira's honest unease, and wondered which of the two, because that was how it felt now, like 2 people navigating the same narrow ledge, actually had further to fall. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself replaying the map room conversation from 9 days before. Kendrick's gentle voice, the flicker Emerich never saw. She had no proof of anything, only the itch of it. The same itch that told a servant which floorboard would creak before she ever stepped on it. Quietly, she decided to start listening more than she talked. The second near-miss came without warning, the way Zbigniew had told her it would, not during a moment of danger, but during an ordinary one, which was somehow worse. They were in the map room alone this time, Emerich showing her the shape of his own kingdom the way another man might have shown her a garden, the Sablerage wilds pressing against the western border, Sepulchretop spires marked in old ink at the center, the long, empty stretch of the Nettlecombe wilds where, he told her, nothing had settled in living memory because even the wolves found it inhospitable.
My grandfather's grandfather drew this map. Most of it's wrong now. Borders move. Kings don't usually, but borders always do.
She'd laughed, actually laughed, the first unguarded sound she'd made in his presence in days, and he'd gone very still the way he did now whenever she surprised him.
Do that again.
Do what?
Laugh like you forgot to be careful around me.
She hadn't meant to step closer. She wasn't sure afterward that she'd stepped at all, only that the distance between them had somehow become smaller, and his hand had come up to rest along her jaw with the gentleness that didn't match the sudden, terrible focus in his eyes.
Wren.
You're not asking me to step back this time.
I'm trying to. Give me a moment. I'm trying.
His thumb traced the 2 small marks at her throat, already fully healed, already permanent, and something in him seemed to war with itself so visibly that she could almost name each side of the argument. She could hear her own pulse now, loud in her own ears, and beneath it, some instinct older than reason told her he could hear it too. Not just hear it, but feel it, the way a held breath feels the moment before it breaks.
6 days since I fed. I told myself I could manage longer around you than I actually can. That was arrogance, and I don't often get to indulge in it anymore, so forgive me for enjoying the mistake slightly more than I should.
What happens if you don't pull back?
Nothing you're not ready for. Not tonight, but I want you to understand that the version of me standing here, restrained and reasonable, he is doing considerable work to stay that way, and I would rather you know that than assume it comes easily.
He stepped back first, This time, an act of will she was starting to recognize cost him more than anyone at court ever gave him credit for. Later, walking back to her own small room in the servants' wing, a room she still hadn't quite been told whether she was allowed to leave behind, Wren realized she could feel him. Not clearly, not in words, just a low, steady awareness at the edge of her mind, like knowing which direction was north without needing to check. She didn't tell Hesper. She wasn't sure yet if it was a gift or the first symptom of something she should be afraid of. Kendrick watched them part from the map room doorway, unseen by either, his expression arranged into the same patient warmth he wore for the entire court. He waited until their footsteps faded in opposite directions before allowing himself a single, private note in the ledger he carried everywhere, a habit everyone assumed was administrative and no one had ever asked to see the contents of. The council convened 3 days later to formally address what the court was now calling, with careful neutrality, the matter of the unwitnessed claim. Wren wasn't permitted inside. Hesper was, technically, since servants were allowed to stand along the walls of the council chamber as long as they were silent and useful, and she reported back everything she could remember, word for word, the moment the doors opened again.
Kendrick spoke first. Before anyone could move to challenge Emerich formally, he stood up and defended him, called the claim rash but not unlawful in spirit, said the 7-day ritual was a formality that predated half the current noble houses anyway, argued the court should extend a grace period instead of a challenge.
That sounds like he helped us.
That's what everyone in that room thinks he did, Lubomira included. I watched her face soften the moment he said it.
Wren felt the same unease she'd felt in the map room doorway, the one she still hadn't found a name for.
But the grace period he proposed has conditions. Emerich has to present you formally to the full realm of Challenge-Spire's noble assembly, unescorted before the turning of the season. And if any 3 houses object at that assembly, the claim is void whether he consents or not. Kendrick built the king a door out of the room he's currently standing in, and made it look like a gift.
When Wren found Emerich that night, he already knew. Of course he knew. Kendrick had briefed him personally, gently, with the same reasonable warmth he used for everything.
He thinks he's protecting me from myself. He's done it before, on smaller matters, and been right often enough that I've stopped questioning the pattern.
And if he's wrong this time?
Then I'll have handed my own court the exact mechanism it needs to take you from me, dressed up as mercy, and I will have thanked the man who built it.
He said it evenly, almost calmly, but Wren had learned enough of him by now to hear what sat underneath the calm. Not fear exactly, something closer to a king counting for the first time in a very long while. How few people in his own castle he could be entirely certain of.
Sivutnia still. You, I think, more than I expected to this quickly. Beyond that, I find I am no longer certain, and I do not care for how recently that became true.
Zibmiyu came to her the next morning before the frost had even begun to lift from the courtyard stones. His expression unreadable in the particular way old vampires' expressions became unreadable when they had decided something serious and hadn't yet decided who deserved to hear it.
The noble assembly Kendrick has arranged is not a grace period. Read it plainly, and it is a trial with a season's delay attached, dressed in language soft enough that Emerich thanked the man who wrote it. I have seen this maneuver before, though never from Kendrick, and never aimed at anyone I had reason to protect.
Then why hasn't anyone said so out loud? Why is it only you in a corridor before anyone else is awake?
Because saying it out loud requires accusing a man 30 years into a spotless record on the strength of a feeling an old vampire can't fully explain even to himself. I intend to watch him more closely regardless. I would suggest you do the same, quietly the way you've apparently already started.
Outside, the first frost of the season had settled over Sepulchretop's spires, silvering the old ink-drawn borders of a map that Emerich had told her once hadn't been accurate in generations. Somewhere beneath that frost, a season was already turning toward the noble assembly Kendrick had built for them. A door dressed as a gift, closing slowly, one grace period at a time. Zibigniew came to them, not at dawn this time, but well past midnight, which told Wren more than his words did before he'd said a single one.
There is a rider from House Dagny's holdings who reached the outer gate an hour past midnight, asking after this servant girl by name. He gave a false reason for his errand. I've had him held for questioning quietly before anyone else noticed him arrive.
Dagny doesn't concern itself with servants.
Dagny doesn't. Whoever is using Dagny's name to send a man asking after Wren in the dead of night very much does. Whatever Kendrick has built with his grace period and his noble assembly, someone isn't willing to wait for the season to turn. An unwitnessed claim has no standing under coven law. Until the assembly, or until you complete this properly, she is, in every way the law recognizes, unclaimed and unprotected. That makes her a target for anyone bold enough to act before the vote.
Wren felt the cold of it settle somewhere beneath her collarbone, more precise and more frightening than the vague unease Kendrick and Lubomira had left her with separately.
What does complete this properly mean exactly?
It means a claiming bite, witnessed, not the 7-day ritual. There isn't time left to pretend that's still available to you, but a witnessed claim made before a coven elder of standing carries weight under the oldest version of the law, the version that predates most of the ceremony built up around it since. I am willing to stand as that witness tonight, if you're both willing to stop waiting for permission that was never going to be freely given.
Emerich went very still. The way Wren had learned meant he was doing careful, deliberate work to keep himself from simply acting on instinct.
Wren, this isn't a small thing I'm asking. A claiming bite binds you to me in ways the unwitnessed mark doesn't. You'd feel what I feel, more clearly than you already do. I'd feel you. It doesn't undo easily, and it doesn't undo kindly. I won't have you agree to it because a stranger asked after your name at a gate at an ungodly hour.
You're not asking me to agree because I'm frightened. You're asking because you already know what I'll say, and you want to hear me say it anyway.
I want you to say it because you mean it. There's a difference, and I intend to keep noticing it even now.
Then ask me properly.
He did, not with ceremony, not with the kind of formal language the court would have demanded of a 7-day ritual, but plainly the way he seemed to do everything that mattered to him.
Wren, I want to claim you properly, before a witness, in a way the law can't quietly unmake later. I want it because I mean it, not because Kendrick built a trap I need to climb out of. Say yes only if the reason is the same as mine.
Yes.
Vignia stepped back into the shadow of the doorway, close enough to witness, far enough to grant them something that felt, in the moment, almost private. Emmerich's hand came up along her jaw the way it had in the map room, except this time neither of them pulled back.
This will hurt for a moment, then it won't.
Wren felt his mouth at her throat before she felt the bite itself. A pressure first, deliberate and unhurried, nothing like the guard's blade had been, nothing like an accident. Then the 2 clean points of it, and a warmth that spread outward from her throat like something being poured rather than taken, pain arriving and dissolving into something else, almost before she could name it as pain at all. She felt him too, distantly, the way Zbigniew had warned her she would. Not his thoughts, not words, but the shape of what he felt. Want, restraint, something that might have been closer to reverence than either. He drew back before she expected him to, his control asserting itself with visible effort, and pressed his forehead briefly to hers while the 2 new marks at her throat began, already, to ache in a way that felt less like injury and more like belonging.
It's done. Witnessed and recorded as such the moment I return to the archive. Whatever Kendrick built for the assembly, he built it for an unwitnessed claim. He's about to discover the ground has moved.
If you're still with us this far into the story, this is usually where I'd ask you to stay a little longer. Subscribe if you want to know what Kendrick does when he learns the ground moved under him. And like this, if that scene did something to you that you're not going to admit to out loud, by morning the whole castle knew, though no announcement had been made. Vampires felt these things the way weather fronts announce themselves before the first drop of rain, a change in the air of Sepulchretop that every coven member of a certain age can name on sight. Wren caught Lubomira watching her across the breakfast hall with an expression that wasn't quite approval, but wasn't quite alarm either. She caught Kendrick watching her too, and unlike Lubomira, Kendrick's expression gave her nothing at all. Lubomira found her within the hour, in the same corridor where she'd delivered her warning weeks before, as though the castle had decided that corridor belonged to the 2 of them now.
A witnessed claim. Zbigniew standing for it no less. That was either very brave or very foolish, and I confess I haven't decided which.
Does it matter which, if it's done?
It matters to me because I find I'd rather it were brave. My cousin never had a witness. Nobody ever stood in a doorway for her and made it mean something under the law. You have that now, whatever else is still uncertain. And I'll admit I take a certain satisfaction in watching Kendrick's carefully built grace period lose most of its teeth overnight.
You still trust him, Kendrick?
I trusted his argument in the council chamber. I'm considerably less certain this morning that I trust the man who made it. Call it an old noble woman's instinct catching up slowly to what a servant girl apparently noticed weeks ago.
She didn't explain further, and Wren didn't ask her to. It was enough for now to know that the ledge Lubomira had once described them as sharing had narrowed to something closer to solid ground. The bond made the near misses worse, not better, or Wren hadn't expected that, though Zbigniew, when she asked him, said he wasn't surprised in the slightest.
A witnessed claim doesn't lessen a vampire's craving for his claimed one. If anything, it sharpens it, the way a name sharpens a want you'd previously only had the shape of. He'll need to feed elsewhere, properly and often, for longer than either of you will find comfortable, or he will not be able to be near you at all without it costing him more than either of you can spend.
3 nights later, Emerich returned from feeding pale in a way Wren hadn't seen on him before, his eyes darker than usual, his movements too careful, like a man testing ice before trusting his full weight to it.
Don't come any closer tonight.
You said that the last time, and it was fine.
It was fine because I hadn't fed in 6 days and had some margin left to spend. Tonight I fed an hour ago and it isn't helping the way it should. Something about the claim has changed the math, and I haven't finished working out the new sum.
She stepped closer anyway, not out of defiance, only because some instinct newer than her own caution told her to, and watched something in him strain, visibly, audibly, his breath catching in a way that had nothing to do with meeting air.
Wren, stop.
The word came out rougher than anything she'd heard from him yet, and for one long moment she watched him fight something that didn't look like restraint, so much as a physical battle against an opponent only he could see, his own craving, moving on instinct that had stopped waiting politely for his permission.
Leave the room, now, please.
She left. She stood outside the door afterward with her back against the stone, her own pulse loud in her ears, and understood for the first time that whatever she had joined herself to in that witnessed bite, it came with an edge that could, on a different night, have gone very differently. Hesper found her there 20 minutes later, still catching her breath. I've been going through the household ledgers, the mundane ones. Wine deliveries, candle orders, things nobody thinks to guard. Kendrick has been paying a courier out of his own household stipend, not the Crown's coffers, once a fortnight for the better part of a year, long before you ever poured a cup of wine in this castle.
Paying who?
I don't know yet. The ledger only lists a route. Sepulchretop to Wolfharbor and back. But a man doesn't hide a payment inside his own household accounts unless he doesn't want the Crown's stewards asking who's receiving it.
Wolfharbor isn't Realm of Nelspire territory.
No, it isn't. Which is precisely why I brought it to you and not to Zbigniew. If I'm wrong, it's a servant's foolish guess. If I'm right, I'd rather you decide who else needs to know before the wrong person overhears it.
Wren didn't sleep that night. She lay awake instead, cataloging every gentle, reasonable thing Kendrick had ever said to her, searching each one for the shape of a lie she was now almost certain had been there all along. Emerich forbade her from investigating further, which she had expected, and which changed nothing about her intentions, which he had apparently not expected at all.
I want you inside the residence wing until the assembly. Guarded, if you'll allow it, though. I suspect you won't.
You want me hidden?
I want you safe. I recognize those aren't quite the same thing, and I'm asking you to permit the overlap anyway, just until I understand what Kendrick is doing well enough to counter it.
You don't get to decide that for me. Not after everything else you've already decided without asking. The claim, the bite, all of it done because you judged it necessary and I happened to agree. I did agree, I'm not undoing that. But I'm not going to spend the next several weeks sitting in a room being protected while the person trying to destroy us moves freely through this castle collecting whatever he's collecting.
Wren.
I found Hesper's ledger discovery before Zbigniew did. I noticed Kendrick's satisfaction in the map room before you ever did. I am not fragile. And I am not useless. And if you truly meant what you said the night you claimed me, that you wanted this because it was true, not because it solved a problem, Then let me help solve this one instead of hiding from it.
He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes that wasn't quite surrender and wasn't quite refusal either.
If I agree to this, you tell me everything you learn, the moment you learn it. No decisions made alone on either side. I've spent long enough learning that lesson the hard way with Kendrick. I won't repeat it with you.
Agreed.
She began quietly the following morning, not with confrontation, which she suspected would only teach Kendrick to hide more carefully, but with the same patient attentiveness that had made her a good servant before any of this began. She noted which hours he kept. She noted that he took his private correspondence to the Western Tower himself, rather than trusting it to any courier inside the castle. She noted, 3 days into her quiet watching, that the tower window overlooking the courtyard was the one room in Sepulchretop where Kendrick's careful warmth seemed to briefly, entirely, fall away, visible only from the angle of the old servant's stair, which nobody but the servants themselves still remembered existed.
I need to get into that tower?
You need to let me get into that tower. You've done well, girl. Better than I expected, but there's a considerable difference between watching a man's habits from a stairwell and standing in a room with him if he catches you there. Let an old vampire spend his age on something useful, for once.
While Zebigniew made his own quiet arrangements, Wren made hers. She found Kendrick in the library 2 mornings later deliberately and let herself be seen finding him.
I wanted to thank you for the council speech. Hesper told me what you argued on our behalf.
I only said what seemed reasonable. I hope the grace period gives you both the room you need to settle this properly.
It must be strange, being trusted by everyone the way you are. I don't think I've met a single person in this castle who has a bad word to say about you.
That's kind of you, though I suspect it says more about how quiet a court can be when no one has reason to look too closely at anything.
Is there reason to look closely at you, Kendrick?
She asked it lightly, almost playfully, watching his face the entire time the way she'd learned to watch a floorboard for the give that came before the creak. For one instant, brief enough that she might have imagined it if she hadn't already learned exactly what to look for. Something in his expression still that had nothing to do with offense.
No more than any man who has served a king for 30 years and made his share of enemies doing it honestly. Was there something specific troubling you?
No. I suppose I'm still learning who to trust in a castle that had every reason to hate me a fortnight ago, and now, apparently, doesn't.
A wise instinct. I'd hold on to it if I were you.
She left the library with her pulse steadier than it had any right to be, and the certainty, cold and complete, that she had just told the one person in Sepulchretop most dangerous to her exactly how closely she was watching him. Zebigniew returned from the Western Tower 2 nights later with a single folded letter and an expression Wren had never seen on him before. Not anger, which she might have expected, but something colder.
Wolfharbor isn't a courier route. It's a name. There's a coven exile living there, stripped of standing 3 centuries past for an offense the record doesn't specify, and Kendrick has been funding him for the better part of a year. I don't yet know why. I know that whatever it is, it required money and secrecy in equal measure, which is not what a man spends either of on nothing.
Before anyone could act on it, the tower's absence apparently reported back to exactly the person it shouldn't have. That night, a stranger came over the eastern wall of Sepulchretop past the watch, a vampire lord unfamiliar to the household guard, moving with the particular confidence of someone who believed the law itself already stood behind him. He found Wren in the corridor outside her old servant's room, the one she still returned to out of habit more than need, and made no effort at courtesy before closing a hand around her wrist hard enough to bruise. He said only that the claim was void by the coven's own law until the assembly confirmed it, and that he intended to remove the disputed matter from the castle before that vote could be corrupted any further, as if she were cargo, not a person. The same flattening logic Kendrick had used in the map room, dressed now in a stranger's far less careful voice. Wren didn't scream this time either. She fought instead, uselessly against a grip that outweighed her by considerable strength, until Emerich arrived close enough behind the sound of it that she never fully understood afterward how he'd crossed that much distance so quickly. What happened next, Wren would only ever remember in fragments. The stranger's grip gone from her wrist all at once. Emerich's voice dropped into something that didn't sound entirely like him anymore. Low and even and far more frightening than shouting would have been. She remembered being pulled behind him, her back against the corridor wall, and watching centuries of a king's famous restraint simply stop being relevant. The fight itself was brief and entirely one-sided. Emerich moved the ways Zbigniew had once told her old vampires moved when they stopped holding back, too fast to properly follow, silent in a way that made the eventual sound of impact worse rather than better. The stranger struck the corridor wall hard enough to crack the old stone behind him, recovered, and came at Emerich a second time with a blade Wren hadn't even seen him draw. She saw the angle of it before Emerich did, or thought she did, and threw the only thing within reach, a heavy iron candle stand, hard enough into the stranger's knee to buy the half-second Emerich needed to close the last of the distance between them. It was, she would think later, a small and clumsy thing to have done. It was also, Zbigniew told her afterward, was something that might almost have been approval, exactly the kind of small, clumsy thing that kept a king from having to explain a blade wound to his own council in the morning. The stranger was on the ground before Wren had finished drawing the breath she'd been holding, and Emerich stood over him with an expression that had nothing civilized left in it at all.
Tell whoever sent you that the claim was witnessed 3 nights ago, properly, before a coven elder. Tell them the girl they came to collect belongs to a king who has just remembered exactly how little he enjoys being tested. And tell them, whoever they are, that I intend to learn their name before the season turns.
Zbigniew arrived moments later, took in the scene, and did not look surprised, so much as grimly satisfied to have his suspicion confirmed by something other than a ledger.
He'll talk, or he won't. But either way, this proves the claim was never the actual target. Somebody wants you removed regardless of what the assembly decides, which means the assembly itself may only ever have been the distraction, not the plan.
Kendrick appeared not long after, drawn by the commotion like everyone else in the residence wing, his face arranging itself into exactly the concerned warmth Wren had once found reassuring and now found unbearable to look at.
My king, is she hurt? I came as soon as I heard.
She's unharmed, no thanks to whoever sent him.
A dreadful business. I'll have the household guard doubled at every gate before morning. Whoever's behind this, they'll answer for it.
Wren watched him say it, watched the concern sit so naturally on his face that she understood with a sinking certainty exactly why nobody in this castle had caught him yet. He wasn't lying badly. He was lying beautifully. The way he did everything, and the letter Zbigniew now held, folded and unmentioned in his coat, was the only thing in the room that knew otherwise. The days after settled into something that wasn't quite peace, though everyone in Sepulchretop seemed willing to call it that, for lack of a better word. The assembly Kendrick had built was still weeks away. The claim, witnessed now, stood on firmer ground than it had. The stranger who'd come over the wall gave a name under questioning that led nowhere. An alias. Zbigniew confirmed grimly, purchased the same way the coven exile in Wolfharbor had apparently been purchased, by someone with resources enough not to leave a trail that pointed home. Emerich and Wren stood together on the north battlement the night Zbigniew delivered that news, looking out over a border his grandfather's grandfather had drawn wrong on a map 2 floors below them.
I keep waiting to feel like this is over. It never quite arrives.
Maybe it isn't supposed to. Maybe it's just the next thing, and the thing after that, for as long as someone wants what we have badly enough to keep paying for it.
That's a bleak way to see a bond I intended as a kindness.
It's not bleak. I meant it as staying. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes for the assembly, or comes over the wall, or comes wearing Kendrick's very good manners while it lies to both our faces.
If you've stayed with this story through everything it's put you through tonight, that's exactly the kind of loyalty this castle could use more of. Subscribe, so you don't miss what happens when Kendrick's letter finally gets read aloud. Like this, if you want more of Sepulchretop, a particular brand of trouble. And tell me in the comments who you think is really waiting in Wolfharbor. Zbigniew found them there before either of them expected him.
I read the letter myself twice before I brought it to either of you. It isn't signed, it isn't addressed to Kendrick by name, but...
It references a debt owed and a season's patience running out, and it closes with a single line. I haven't been able to stop turning over. The turning was promised, and turning is not the sort of promise that keeps well past its season. Wren felt the 2 marks at her throat ache, sudden and sharp, the way they hadn't since the night they were made.
Turning. As in?
As in someone somewhere was promised a transformation by Kendrick in exchange for something he has not yet delivered. Whether that promise concerns you, girl, or concerns someone else entirely, I cannot yet say. I can only tell you that the season Kendrick built his grace period around was never really about the assembly at all. It was a deadline, and I do not know yet whose.
The frost outside had thickened since the night of the claiming, silvering the old borders on Emerich's ruined map 2 floors below, and somewhere past the western wall, in a direction none of them could yet name, a debt was still quietly coming due. Lubomira found Wren alone on the battlement the following evening, drawn, she said, by nothing more than the particular quality of a silence that carried through half the residence wing.
Salbignio told me what the letter said. Not everything, he's careful, even with me, but enough. A promise turning, and debt owed. I've sat on enough councils to know what that kind of language usually means, and I don't like any of the answers I've come to.
What does it usually mean?
That someone made a bargain they couldn't keep with their own resources, and offered something that wasn't theirs to give instead. Whether that something is you, or the crown itself, or some third thing none of us have thought to guard yet, I genuinely don't know. I only know that a man patient enough to fund an exile for a year without once losing his composure in council is not a man who panics simply because his first attempt failed on a corridor floor.
Wren looked out past her toward the dark line of the Sableridge Wilds, and further, toward wherever Wolfharbor sat beneath its own The note was sealed with plain wax, no crest, no signature, only her name, in a hand she didn't recognize, on parchment that had somehow found its way onto her own writing desk without anyone seeing who left it there. Inside, folded once, lay a single pressed white flower, its petals gone brittle and silver with age. Wren had seen that exact flower only once before, sketched into the corner of one of Zegmu's old maps, marking a churchyard outside Wolfharbor. The note itself said only 4 words: "You should have asked." She sat with it a long moment before she moved it all, turning the wax seal over uselessly in her fingers. The shutters were latched, the door was barred, the way she barred it every night since the wall. None of it apparently had been enough to keep someone from reaching her desk unseen. 2 weeks had passed since Zbigniew's letter had named a season instead of a person, and winter had used every one of them to tighten its grip on Sepulchretop. Wren had grown used to sleeping with the shutters closed against a cold that no longer felt seasonal so much as watchful. She had grown used, too, to a kind of waiting that refused to sit still. Zbigniew combing old coven records for the name of an exile, long since erased from polite memory. Lubomira spending her house's considerable reach on questions dressed as gossip. Hesper rereading ledgers that had already given up everything they had to give. The noble assembly still sat weeks off, a date Kendrick had built like a slow-closing door. Nobody had moved against Wren again since the stranger over the wall. That absence of danger had started to feel less like safety and more like a held breath. Sepulchretop in deep winter was a different castle than the one Wren had first served in. The corridors that had once felt merely old now felt ancient in a way that pressed against her, stone sweating cold even where the torches burned steadiest. She had taken to walking with Hesper in the mornings, not because either of them needed the exercise, but because 2 sets of footsteps in an empty hallway felt less like an invitation than one.
You're doing the thing again. Where you go quiet and I can practically hear you thinking in circles.
I keep waiting for something to happen. It's worse than when something actually does.
Small mercies. At least this time nobody's put a blade to your throat yet.
Yet.
Hesper hadn't argued the point, which had told Wren more than any answer could have. She turned the flower over in her fingers now, careful of its brittle edges, and thought of the churchyard sketch again. A name she hadn't been able to make out, half erased by age, tucked beneath the little pressed flower symbol Zbigniew used to mark graves he considered worth remembering. Someone had gone to that churchyard. Someone had taken this flower from it, and someone had put it on her desk without a single servant, guard, or vampire in Sepulchretop noticing them do it. That was the part she couldn't get past. Not the flower, not even the note. The fact that whoever had done this had walked through a castle full of people with vampiric senses and left no trace at all. She brought both note and flower to Emerich before she'd fully decided what she thought they meant.
Show me.
Wren set them on the map table between them and watched him go very still in the particular way he did now, whenever something threatened the narrow peace they'd built since the claiming.
Where was this?
My writing desk. Nobody saw who left it, or if they did, they aren't saying so.
That's not possible. Every servant in this wing would notice a stranger, and every vampire in this castle would smell one.
And yet,
He picked up the flower himself then, turning it beneath the candlelight with a care that struck her as almost tender, given what it apparently represented.
This flower only grows in one place I know of. A cemetery outside Wolfharbor on ground the local coven considers cursed. I haven't set foot there in longer than I care to count.
someone else has. Recently enough that this hasn't fully dried.
Sibigno arrived before either of them could say more. Drawn, he admitted, by nothing except an old instinct that had rarely steered him wrong.
Let me see it.
He turned the flower over exactly as Wren had, then went still in a different way than Emerich had, not alarmed, but recognizing.
I know this mark. I sketched it myself years ago onto a map I thought no one else had ever looked at closely. Whoever sent this either found my map or has stood in that churchyard themselves and knows precisely what that flower means to the person buried beneath it.
What does it mean?
It marks a grave the local coven refuses to tend. An exile's grave, though the man in it wasn't dead when I last had reason to know his name. If I am right about who this is, someone wants us to know they've found him, or that they know we're looking.
Why leave it here instead of simply telling us that outright?
Because a message you have to work to understand tells you more about who sent it than one handed to you plainly. Whoever left this wanted us to recognize the mark ourselves, on our own time, so that when the meaning landed, it would land the way a threat lands, privately, and with the particular dread of realizing you should have understood sooner.
You're saying it's a warning.
I'm saying it's a warning shaped like an invitation. Someone wants to be found. And that is rarely the posture of someone who intends to lose.
If a story's ever made you want to know exactly how much someone is willing to risk to protect the people they love, this is that kind of story. Subscribe if you want to see how far Emerich goes to keep Wren safe from whatever's coming out of Wolfharbor. Like it is that flower unsettled you as much as unsettled her. And comment below with your best guess at whose grave that actually is. The lead that finally moved things forward came not from the flower but from the stable yard, where a groom mentioned in passing, to no one in particular, that he remembered a Wolfharbor marked courier riding through Sepulchretop's outer gate on more than one occasion. The first of them, he was fairly certain, months before the night the king had knelt for a servant girl at all. Wren went to the stable yard herself the next morning, before she'd fully decided whether it was wise to, and found the groom mucking out a stall with the unhurried patience of a man who'd rather talk than work. He remembered the courier's crest clearly enough, he said, a black wolf's head on gray, a mark he'd never seen before or since outside that particular rider. He remembered the horse, too. A dour gray gelding that never seemed to need resting the way a horse ridden that hard should have, and a rider who never once removed his hood even indoors, winter or otherwise. He remembered, too, being paid handsomely by Kendrick's own steward, not to mention the visits to anyone, a request that had struck him as odd at the time and stranger still, now that Wren was standing in front of him asking about it directly. Hesper caught up with her outside the stable, having heard secondhand that Wren had gone alone and clearly unhappy about it.
You could have brought me, or Sibignu, anyone.
I needed him to talk to a servant, not a queen or an elder. People tell servants things they'd never say to either.
That's fair. It's also reckless, and you know it.
Months before the claim, before the wine cup, I asked him twice to be sure he wasn't confusing dates, and he wasn't. Kendrick's courier was riding to Wolfharbor before I ever caught the king's attention at all.
Wren felt something cold settle where the note's chill had already loosened its grip only slightly.
That doesn't make sense. Why would Kendrick be paying a Wolfharbor exile before I even existed to him?
I don't know. But it means whatever he's planning didn't start the night you spilled that wine. It started before you were anyone to him at all.
Wren didn't sleep well that night, turning the timeline over and over, searching for a version of it that didn't feel like being watched from further back than she'd ever imagined. Hesper found her at breakfast the next morning, pushing food around a plate neither of them had touched.
You look like you didn't sleep at all.
I kept trying to work out how long someone would have to plan something before it stopped being a plan and just became who they were.
That's a bleak way to think about a man who brings the king tea and remembers everyone's birthday.
He's never once asked mine.
Hesper considered that longer than Wren expected her to, then pushed her own plate aside entirely.
No, I don't suppose he has.
The first near miss of the new season caught her by surprise, precisely because she'd stopped expecting it to be this easy to trigger. She found Emerich in the map room again, poring over old Wolfharbor trade routes by candlelight, and made the mistake of resting a hand on his shoulder without announcing herself first. He turned faster than she'd ever seen him move, and for one suspended moment his eyes held nothing she recognized at all. No warmth, no restraint, only a flat black focus that found her throat before it found her face.
Don't do that.
I'm sorry. I didn't think.
I know. That's precisely the problem. I fed 3 nights ago. 3 nights, Wren, and I still nearly lost myself over a hand on my shoulder in a lit room in the middle of the evening. That never used to happen this easily.
She could feel her own pulse now, loud and stupid in her ears, the way it always seemed to announce itself the moment it mattered least for it to. He was watching that pulse, she realized, not her face. Her throat and the small betraying flutter of it, the way a man watches a door he has promised himself he will not open.
Is it getting worse?
I don't know what it's doing. I only know the old rules don't seem to hold the way they used to, and I would rather tell you that plainly than let you find out by accident the way I nearly found out just now.
He didn't elaborate further, though she noticed the way his hand had curled, briefly, into a fist against the table before he made himself release it, finger by finger like a man disarming something only he could see. Lebomera's contribution arrived 3 days later, delivered with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had spent considerable effort proving herself right. She had not, she admitted, gone about it gently. Cornering 2 of the coven's oldest elders into a private sitting room and refusing to leave until one of them said something useful had taken the better part of an evening and, by her own account, most of her patience. The elders had danced around the subject for an hour before one of them, tired and irritated enough to stop guarding his words, had finally given her the name she'd come for.
His name is Christian, or was before the coven stripped it from him along with everything else. He held minor standing in Kendrick's own generation, 3 centuries past, before Kendrick had him exiled on a charge of coven betrayal that, according to the 2 elders I managed to corner into speaking about it, never entirely made sense to anyone who actually knew the man.
What happened between them?
A woman, if the elders are to be believed, though neither would say her name aloud even now. Christian loved her. Kendrick wanted her, for reasons more political than romantic. From what I could gather, Christian ended up exiled to Wolfharbor on grounds that conveniently removed the only obstacle standing between Kendrick and whatever he wanted from that alliance. Nobody has spoken his name at this court since.
And now Kendrick is paying him.
And now Kendrick is paying him, after 3 centuries of silence, right around the time a certain servant girl became his king's problem. I don't believe in coincidence at this court. Not anymore.
Do you know her name? The woman.
No, and I suspect that's deliberate. A story with a name in it can be verified, argued with, contradicted by someone who remembers her differently. A story without one just sits there being unpleasant and unprovable, which suits whoever's been protecting Kendrick's version of it for 300 years.
You think someone's still protecting him?
I think a man doesn't keep a secret that cleanly for that long without help, willing or otherwise.
The second near miss found her that same evening, in the corridor outside her own chamber, where Emerich had taken to waiting some nights simply to see her safely to her door before retreating to whatever distance his control currently required. He didn't touch her this time. He didn't need to. She only had to stand close enough, tired and unguarded, after a long day of chasing dead men's names through other people's memories, and watch his jaw tighten in the low torchlight.
Go inside, Wren, now while I can still ask nicely.
You fed 2 days ago.
I'm aware of exactly how recently I fed. It isn't helping the way it should, and I would rather you not watch me discover that a second time in 1 week.
If you were in her position, bound to someone whose control was visibly slipping a little further every week, would you still choose to stay this close, or would some part of you start looking for the door? She went inside. She stood with her back against the closed door afterward, listening to his footsteps retreat down the corridor at a pace just slightly too controlled to be unhurried, and asked herself, not for the first time, what exactly it would take before feeding stopped mattering at all. Zbigniew took the pieces Lubomira had gathered and turned them over for 2 full days before he brought his conclusion to Wren and Emerich together, his expression graver than either had seen since the night of the letter.
A stripped exile can only be restored to coven standing through one recognized act, sponsoring a lawful turning, witnessed and recorded that the coven accepts as sufficient penance for whatever cost him his place. Kendrick owes Christian a debt 3 centuries old. I believe the payment he promised was precisely that, a turning, properly witnessed, delivered on Kendrick's schedule, not the coven's.
Wren felt the shape of it before she could fully name it, cold moving down through her in a way that had nothing to do with the season.
He needed someone to turn.
He needed someone the coven would accept as a lawful subject for it, a human close enough to power that the turning would carry real weight when it happened. I do not yet know whether he arranged for that human to be you specifically, or whether you simply became useful once you'd already caught Emmerich's attention on your own. Either answer troubles me. I suspect it will trouble you more.
Emerich had said nothing through most of it, standing very still with one hand braced against the map table, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone quiet in a way Wren had learned to find more unsettling than shouting.
He's known me since before I took the crown. He watched me bury 3 predecessors of his own choosing. If he needed a lawful turning to buy back an old friend's standing, he could have asked me directly at any point in 30 years, and I would have at least heard him out.
Perhaps he considered the answer too uncertain to risk. Or perhaps asking you directly was never the plan he wanted. A gift you're given feels different than a debt you're asked to help settle. He may have decided you'd only ever accept the first.
So he built me into the first instead. Nobody answered her, which was its own kind of answer. She left the map room before either of them could see her face do whatever it was about to do, and found herself, some time later, in the cold of the north battlement without any clear memory of walking there. Emerich found her within minutes, which told her he'd likely followed the moment he noticed she'd gone.
Whatever he intended when this started, it isn't what's true now. I need you to hear that plainly, the same way I told you about the feeding.
How do you separate the two? His plan and whatever's true now. I don't know where one stops and the other begins anymore, and I'm not sure you do either.
I don't. Not entirely. I only know which one I choose every day, regardless of how it started.
She didn't have an answer for that. She let him stand beside her at the railing instead, close enough that the cold felt slightly less absolute, and said nothing further about it that night. Kendrick, unaware his name had been spoken so plainly in a room he wasn't in, was at that same hour occupied with a considerably smaller and more immediate concern. Word had reached him, the resource even Zbigniew hadn't yet identified, that questions were being asked in Wolfharbor about an old exile's grave, questions traceable, with enough effort, back to Sepulchretop itself. He moved the following morning with his usual unhurried grace, requesting a private word with 2 of the noble houses still undecided on the matter of the king's claim, framing his visit as nothing more than a courtesy update on assembly logistics. He brought no ledger this time, no written proposal, only the same gentle certainty that had carried him through 30 years of court business, without a single house ever thinking to question his math.
I only wanted you to hear it from me directly, before the formal notice goes out. The assembly has been moved forward. The king's advisors, myself included, felt the court had waited long enough for resolution on this matter. I trust that won't inconvenience either of your houses.
Neither house objected. Neither house had any reason to suspect that the man moving their calendar was doing so to outrun a question he hadn't yet been asked aloud, and both thanked him, as they always did, for his consideration. By the time the notice reached Emerich formally, the assembly had been shortened by nearly half its remaining weeks, and Kendrick had already thanked himself privately for a piece of foresight nobody else in the castle yet understood the shape of. Emerich read the notice twice before he handed it to Zbigniew without a word, and waited while the old vampire read it a 3rd time, as though a different reading might produce a kinder result.
He's outrunning something. Men who feel secure don't shorten their own timelines without reason. Whatever reached him about Wolfharbor, it frightened him enough to move faster than his usual patience allows.
Which means we have less time to prove any of this than we did yesterday, and considerably less room to be wrong about it.
Then we had better not be wrong.
Wren, listening from the doorway, found herself thinking less about the shortened calendar than about the flower still sitting on her desk, pressed flat inside a book where she'd hidden it, and the 4 words that had come with it. Somebody out there already knew more about this than any of them did. Somebody had wanted her to start asking questions before Kendrick was ready for her to, and somewhere beneath the frost gathering thicker over Sepulchretop spires with every passing night, that same somebody was almost certainly still watching to see whether she would. Digny brought the household ledger to Wren himself 3 days after Lubomir's revelation, his expression the particular kind of grim that told her before he said a word that this was worse than she'd braced for.
I found the record of your hiring, or what should have been an ordinary record if it were ordinary at all.
Wren felt something in her chest go very still.
Tell me?
The steward's ledger shows an override, dated the season before you arrived at Sepulchretop. A specific request, made through Kendrick's own household stipend, rather than the Crown's hiring purse, for a candidate to be selected from the chill market orphan intake by description rather than by the usual lottery. Young, unassuming, no living family to ask questions on her behalf. You were chosen, Wren, before you'd ever seen this castle, before you'd ever seen him.
That isn't possible. I remember being chosen. The steward told me I was fortunate. Lucky out of dozens of names.
You were fortunate, and you were also selected, and both of those things were true at once, without either of you ever knowing it.
Emerich had gone very quiet beside her, reading the ledger entry over her shoulder a second time as though a different reading might change what it said.
He built this years before the wine cup, before I'd so much as learned your name. This was never about my temper, or your defiance, or anything either of us did in that hall the night I knelt.
I was already his, before I ever poured a drop of your wine.
Nobody corrected her. Nobody could have, honestly, and the honesty of that silence was its own kind of unbearable.
I want to be clear about what this does and does not prove. It proves he wanted a specific kind of candidate in this household years ago and went to some trouble to secure her without the Crown's own hiring stewards noticing the override. It does not yet prove he foresaw everything that followed. Emerich's attention, the claim, any of it. He may have simply positioned a piece on the board and waited to see what use it might eventually serve.
That's supposed to be better?
No. I only mean the difference matters when the time comes to answer for it. A man who plans every step is a different threat than a man who plants seeds and waits patiently to see which ones grow into something useful. I do not yet know which one Kendrick is. I suspect we will find out together.
Either way, I was a seed, not a person he happened to notice.
Zbigniew had no answer for that either, and his silence, for once, felt less like an old vampire choosing his words carefully, and more like a man who genuinely didn't have any good ones left to offer her. Emerich left the room without a word some minutes later, and Wren understood, watching him go, that he wasn't leaving her so much as leaving himself, putting distance between his own control and whatever the revelation had just done to it. She found him an hour later in the western gallery, jaw tight, hands braced flat against the cold stone windowsill.
Don't come any closer, not tonight.
Emerich?
I fed yesterday. Yesterday, Wren, and right now I would not trust myself within arm's reach of you. And it has nothing to do with your pulse and everything to do with how badly I want to put my hands through something that isn't Kendrick's throat.
She stayed where she was, out of reach, and watched him breathe through it the way she'd watched him do a dozen times before, except this time the anger seemed to be doing the vampire's work for the craving, tightening something in him that fed on fury as readily as it fed on blood. His hands, braced against the windowsill, had gone white-knuckled around the stone, and for one long moment she watched the muscle along his jaw work as though he were physically holding words back along with everything else.
I keep thinking about every kindness he's ever shown me, every piece of counsel I thanked him for, and now I can't tell which of them were real and which of them were simply him tending a garden he'd already decided to harvest.
Maybe both. People aren't usually only one thing, even the worst of them.
That's a more generous read than I currently have room for.
I'm not being generous to him. I'm trying to be honest, so that when we finally corner him, we corner the man who actually exists instead of the one we built out of our own anger.
He looked at her then, something in his expression cracking slightly towards something gentler, though his hands stayed exactly where they were. If a story like this has ever made you want to shout at a screen because you already know exactly what someone should say next, this is your chance. The comments are right there, and I would genuinely like to know what you'd tell Wren to do with what she just learned. The fallout took longer to settle than either of them expected. Wren spent the following days moving through the castle with a kind of careful blankness, smiling where a smile was required, saying nothing that might reach the wrong ears. While underneath it, she turned the ledger's meaning over and over, searching for a version of it she could live inside, more comfortably. She never found one. Hesper caught the blankness before anyone else did, cornering her in the low archive where Wren had taken, again, to hiding.
You've been performing at people for 3 days? I know performing. I do it for a living, technically.
I don't know how else to move through a castle where the man everyone trusts arranged for me to exist in it.
You move through it exactly like this, carefully, until you don't have to anymore.
And if that takes longer than the assembly allows?
Hesper didn't have an answer for that one, and for once, didn't pretend to. She sat with Wren instead, in silence, for longer than either of them would normally have tolerated a task left undone, until Wren finally spoke again, quieter than before.
Do you ever wonder if he chose you to... for something? Some reason you haven't found yet?
Every day since Big Mew showed you that ledger, I haven't found anything. That doesn't mean there's nothing to find. It just means I haven't looked hard enough yet, or he's better at hiding mine than yours.
That's not comforting.
I did warn you I was fresh out of comforting, months ago now. Some things don't change.
Lubomir's counsel, when it came, was blunter.
Whatever else is true, you cannot let him see this on your face. A man who plans 3 centuries ahead will notice the moment his plan starts behaving strangely, and he will move faster than any of us are ready for the instant he does.
I know.
Then know it with your face, as well as your mind. You've been careless the last few days. Understandably, unaffordably.
The warning proved timely. Kendrick had in fact begun to notice, not Wren's face specifically, but a pattern of small absences and closed doors that had started to accumulate around him with a frequency his 30 years of court instinct refused to dismiss as coincidence. He raised it with Emerich directly, framing his concern in exactly the gentle, reasonable terms he used for everything.
You seem distracted lately, my king. Zabinyu as well, and Lubomira's been unusually occupied with the elders. I only ask because I'd rather help than watch you all carry something alone.
We're managing a great deal before the assembly. That's all it is.
Of course. Forgive me for asking, though I hope you'd tell me if it were ever something more. I served this castle long enough to notice when a household starts keeping its own council, and I've always preferred being useful to being excluded.
You'll be the first to know if that changes.
I would appreciate that, truly.
He left the exchange apparently satisfied, though Emerich noticed, reporting it back to the others that evening, that Kendrick's eyes had lingered a beat too long on the ledger room's door as he passed it, a door that had no particular reason to interest him unless he already suspected exactly what it now contained.
He's testing the water. If he suspects we know, he'll move against the timeline again, faster than the assembly he already shortened once.
Then we need to move first.
Move how? We have suspicion and a ledger entry. We do not yet have him confessing anything, and a king cannot move against his own most trusted advisor on the strength of an old hiring record alone, however damning it looks to us.
Then what would it take? What actually counts as proof? To a coven that's let him hide this for 3 centuries already.
A confession, witnessed, or a second party willing to testify against him under coven oath, someone with equal or greater standing prepared to say plainly what he did and why. Christian himself could do it if he were willing, and if anyone could persuade an exile to trust the very court that exiled him.
That's a considerable if.
It is. I did not say it would be easy. I said it was possible, which is more than we had a fortnight ago.
Wren turned that over for a long moment, feeling the shape of an idea take hold before she'd fully decided whether it was reckless or simply necessary.
Then someone needs to go to Wolfharbor. Someone needs to actually speak to him.
Someone will, carefully and not you, before you finish that thought aloud.
The second wave of near misses arrived that same week, sharper and less predictable than anything before it. Emerich found himself pulling back from Wren over smaller and smaller provocations, a raised voice down the hall, an unexpected touch, once simply the sound of her laughing at something Hesper had said 2 rooms away. He fed more often than he ever had, and it bought him less control each time until even he seemed to stop trusting his own account of how close to breaking he actually was. Zibigno, watching this unfold with the particular concern of a man who had seen the pattern before but never quite this fast, offered the only explanation any of them had.
The bond thrives on crisis, the way a plant thrives on rain it never asked for. The more the two of you are under threat together, the harder it pulls at him. I have seen bonded pairs weather calm decades without incident. I have never seen one weather a season like this without cost.
So it gets worse before the assembly, not better.
I would not bet against it.
It was Wren, in the end, who stopped retreating from it. She found him mid-collapse one evening, back against the map room wall, breathing like a man holding a door shut against something on the other side, candlelight throwing his shadow twice his actual size across the wall of old maps behind him.
Go, please. I don't have the words to ask nicely twice.
No,
Wren.
I'm not leaving you alone with this. You didn't leave me alone with mine, and I am not doing it to you now, whatever it costs either of us.
You don't understand what it could cost.
Then tell me plainly, the way you always do, instead of deciding for me what I can and cannot stand to hear.
He didn't answer that directly. He didn't need to. She could see the answer in the way his hands had curled again, in the black swallowing what little gray remained in his eyes. She crossed the room instead of retreating from it, and took his face in both hands, forcing him to look at her rather than through her.
Look at me. Not through me, at me.
His eyes found hers, black, gone, slightly less absolute, and for a long moment neither of them moved at all. She could feel the effort it cost him not to flinch away, not to close the last small distance between them in the wrong direction entirely, and she held her ground anyway, refusing to be the thing he lost himself to or the thing he pushed away.
This is either the bravest thing you've ever done or the most reckless.
It's usually both with me. You should be used to it by now.
Something in his shoulders finally eased, not fully, but enough. He didn't pull away from her hands. He let himself be steadied instead, for the first time since the ledger, by the one person everyone kept insisting he should be protecting himself from.
Nobody has ever done that before, stood their ground with me when it mattered this much.
Then it's overdue.
They stayed there a long while after, neither speaking, until his breathing had gone fully even again, and the black had receded from his eyes back into the familiar pale gray she'd grown to trust. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost the rough edge it carried during the worst of it.
I keep returning to the same question. If I'd never noticed you at all, if the wine had never spilled, if I'd simply walked past that night the way a king is supposed to walk past a servant, would he have found another way to put you in front of me eventually? Or would you simply have lived your whole life here, unremarkable, exactly as he originally intended?
I don't know. I've been asking myself something worse. Whether the parts of me he'd call useful, quiet, unassuming, no family to make trouble, are actually just parts of who I am. Or whether I became those things because a household chose them for me before I was old enough to choose anything myself.
You are considerably less quiet and unassuming than his ledger entry apparently hoped for. I'd call that proof enough that whatever he selected for, he got something he didn't order.
That almost startled a real laugh out of her, small and tired as it was, and for a moment the map room felt less like the side of a wound and more like simply a room the two of them happened to be standing in together.
I suppose I should thank you for that in a strange sort of way.
Don't. I intend to be considerably angrier about this on your behalf for a good while yet. Save your gratitude for when I've earned it by actually doing something useful with the anger.
Kendrick's next move came without warning. 3 days later, in the form of a rider arriving through the eastern gate at dusk. Not the hooded courier from before, but an open messenger bearing House Dagny's true colors this time, carrying word that had already spread halfway through the lower court by the time it reached Wren directly. The household had rarely moved so fast on a single piece of news. By the time Wren reached the outer hall, half the castle's servants seemed to already know something, even if none of them knew quite what, and the air itself felt different, charged the way it had the night of the wall.
Someone's coming from Wolfharbor. Not a courier. A person. They crossed into the realm of Nullspire 2 days ago, and they're not hiding who they are this time.
You're certain?
House Stadney's rider rode half a day out of his way just to bring the news personally instead of trusting it to a letter. That's not the kind of thing anyone does for a rumor.
If this story's kept you close enough to want to know who's riding towards Sepulchretop right now, don't lose the thread before you find out. Subscribe, like it if that ledger reveal hit as hard for you as it did for her, and leave a comment telling me who you think is finally coming to collect. Zbignev's sources, thinner and slower than Lubomira's, confirmed only a name that meant nothing to any of them yet, and a title that meant considerably more. They're traveling under coven authority, not as a private citizen. Whoever they are, they carry enough standing to act on the coven's behalf directly, which means Kendrick's debt is no longer simply a rumor 3 of us happen to uncover. It is about to become official business on Sepulchretop's own doorstep.
How long?
Days, not weeks. Whatever we intend to do with what we no longer have the luxury of doing it slowly.
Lubomira arrived shortly after, having heard the news through her own channels, her composure only barely holding beneath a visible edge of alarm Wren had never seen on her before.
If the Coven is sending someone with standing to enforce this before the Assembly even convenes, that tells you something about how confident they are that Kendrick's debt will be honored one way or another. Confident enough not to wait for a vote.
Honored owl! What could they actually do here on the king's own ground?
I don't know. I don't like that I don't know. And I like even less that Kendrick, of all people in this castle, is the only one who does.
Wren found Emerich afterward on the same north battlement where he'd once told her he kept waiting to feel like the danger was over. It hadn't arrived yet, that feeling, and by now neither of them expected it to before the assembly at the very earliest.
Whoever's riding toward us, we face them together. Not you hidden away for your own safety. Not me handling it alone to spare you. Together, or we've learned nothing since the wall.
Together? I can live with that.
You'll have to. I don't intend to offer you anything else, not anymore.
She almost smiled at that, despite everything. And for one small moment, the cold pressing in from every direction felt slightly more bearable than it had all week. That night, alone in his private study for the first time in days, Kendrick allowed himself something he had not permitted in front of anyone since the night of the map room, 3 centuries and 1 careless servant girl ago. He set down his pen. He pressed both hands flat against the desk, head bowed, and for one unguarded moment his face held none of its practiced gentleness at all. Only the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent longer keeping a debt quiet than most people spent keeping anything at all, and who could feel, without needing anyone to tell him, that the quiet was finally coming to an end. He straightened before the moment could last long enough for anyone to see it. Nobody did. He returned to his correspondence, wrote 3 more letters in his familiar, unhurried hand, and gave no further outward sign that night or the next morning that anything in his carefully managed world had shifted at all. But somewhere past the Wolfharbor delegation arrived at the outer gate carrying no visible weapons at all, and it was that absence, more than anything a blade might have suggested, that made the household guards' hands go to their own hilts. 3 riders, no banners, no armor beneath their plain gray travel cloaks. The one at the center dismounted first, unhurried, and pushed back her hood to reveal a face the gate guard would later describe to Zbigniew as unremarkable in every way, except that it made him want, quite badly, to look somewhere else. She said only that she had come on coven business, and that the king would want to receive her himself, and something about the flat certainty of it moved the guard to open the gate before he had fully decided to. 2 weeks of frost had done nothing to soften Sepulchretop's watchfulness, and now the thing they had all been watching for had simply walked in through the front. Word of the arrival outran the delegation itself by a good quarter hour, servants and courtiers alike gathering along every window and archway that offered a view of the courtyard below. Wren watched from a servant's corridor window, pressed shoulder to shoulder with Hesper, both of them straining to see past the crowd already forming.
3 of them, that's all. 3 riders and no army behind them, and everyone's acting like the whole castle's already lost.
Maybe that's exactly why an army would be easier to understand.
Emerich received her in the great hall within the hour, standing rather than seated on his own throne, a decision Wren understood without being told. A king who sat looked as though he were granting an audience. A king who stood looked as though he were prepared for anything. The woman who called herself only the magistrate walked the length of the hall unescorted, her plain gray cloak dragging faint frost across the stone, and stalked precisely the correct courtly distance from the throne without anyone having to tell her where that distance was. She introduced herself with a title rather than a name, explained that she carried the coven's authority to investigate matters of broken law wherever they occurred within its reach, and said, in a voice that never rose and never needed to, that she had reason to believe such a matter existed inside this very castle. Wren felt Hesper's hand find hers in the crowd of watching servants, cold and tight.
I don't like how quiet the hall went.
Neither do I.
Zbigniew, standing near enough the throne to be counted among the court's inner circle, watched the magistrate with the particular stillness of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about how fast this could still go wrong. If a story's ever made you hold your breath the moment someone walks into a room like they already know how it ends, this is that kind of story. Subscribe if you want to find out exactly what the coven already knows, like this, if that unarmed arrival unsettled you as much as it unsettled the guard. And tell me in the comments who you think tipped them off. The magistrate requested a private audience before the hour was finished, and Emerich granted it without visible hesitation, though Wren, watching from the edge of the hall, saw the muscle in his jaw tighten the moment he turned to lead the way. Didmingyo, Wren, and the magistrate's own silent second were the only others permitted into the small council chamber. Kendrick, notably, was not summoned, a fact the magistrate seemed to consider carefully before speaking at all. She said the coven had been quietly aware of irregularities in Sepulchretop's household accounts for some time, not months, she clarified, when Zbigniew asked, but the better part of a year, tracked through routes and payments that had eventually led back to a name inside this very court.
You knew before we did.
She didn't deny it. She said only that the coven moved carefully in matters touching a sitting king's own household, and that careful in this instance had meant waiting until the pattern was undeniable rather than merely suspicious.
Who told you? Who inside this castle has been talking to the coven?
The magistrate's expression didn't change at all, which Wren was beginning to understand was itself an answer of sorts. She said only that the coven protected the identities of those who brought it evidence, and that this protection extended even to kings who might wish otherwise.
That's a diplomatic way of telling us you won't say.
She agreed that it was, and did not apologize for it.
Then tell me what you can say.
She was apparently capable of it. She said the coven's investigation centered on payments made from Kendrick's own household stipend to a Wolfharbor exile, and that the coven had reason to believe those payments constituted an attempt to purchase a lawful turning outside proper channels, a serious matter regardless of who the intended subject might be.
The better part of a year, you said, yet you only arrived now, days after we ourselves uncovered the connection independently. That timing troubles me, Magistrate.
She acknowledged that the timing was not coincidence. She said the coven had been building its own case slowly, methodically, and that reports reaching Wolfharbor of questions being asked at Sepulchretop, questions matching the coven's own suspicions almost exactly, had simply accelerated a visit already being planned.
So we did some of your work for you?
The magistrate allowed, for the first time, something that might almost have been the beginning of a smile, gone again before it fully arrived. She said that was one way of putting it, and that the coven was not ungrateful, though gratitude, she added, would have no bearing whatsoever on how the matter was ultimately judged. The audience ended without further explanation, the magistrate withdrawing to guest quarters Kendrick's own staff had, with visible reluctance, been ordered to prepare. Wren found the magistrate alone in the castle's small chapel garden the following morning, an unexpected place to encounter a woman who otherwise seemed to occupy only formal chambers and audience halls. She stood examining a frost-killed rosebush with an attention that seemed genuine rather than performed. The magistrate said without turning that she had wondered when Wren would find a reason to seek her out directly rather than only through others.
Am I that predictable?
She said predictability was not the word she would have chosen. She said most people in Wren's position spent their energy either pleading their case or avoiding her entirely. Curiosity, in her experience, was rarer than either.
Can I ask you something honestly and expect an honest answer?
The magistrate turned to face her fully for the first time and said that honesty cost her nothing and that she would give it where she could.
Do you already know what you're going to decide?
She was quiet long enough that Wren began to doubt she would answer at all. Then she said, simply, that she did not. that the coven's law was old and occasionally contradictory, that Wren's case sat exactly at one of its more uncomfortable seams, and that she had genuinely not yet decided which side of that seam the ruling would fall on. She said she found that she preferred it that way. A judgment reached before the evidence, she said, was not judgment at all. Emerich found Wren afterward in the corridor outside, his composure fraying at the edges in a way she was learning to read as clearly as a held breath.
I don't like this. I don't like that a stranger walked into my own hall knowing more about my own advisor than I did.
Neither do I, but at least now it isn't only the 6 of us against him.
6 of us who trust each other. I have no idea yet whether I can say the same of her.
She stepped closer without quite meaning to and felt, rather than saw, the shift in him, shoulders going rigid, breath catching in a way that had nothing to do with the conversation they were having.
Step back, please.
You fed this morning.
I know precisely when I fed. It bought me considerably less than it should have. Something about today, her, the audience, all of it, has cost me ground I thought I still had.
She stepped back, watching him fight the same private battle she had watched him fight a dozen times before. Except this time, there was no simple explanation waiting at the end of it. Not hunger alone, not proximity alone, something about the day itself, pressing on him from every direction at once.
I used to be able to tell you exactly what triggered it. Today, I genuinely cannot.
The magistrate requested a second audience the following afternoon, this time before the full court rather than a private chamber, a choice Bignio read immediately as deliberate.
She wants witnesses. If she intended mercy, she'd keep this quiet the way she's kept everything else quiet so far.
Standing before the assembled court, the magistrate stated the coven's position plainly, without the careful diplomatic softness of the private audience. She said Kendrick's debt to the exile Christian was genuine, that it remained unpaid in any form the coven recognized as lawful, and that the coven had further reason to believe a specific human subject had been identified years in advance to eventually settle it. She did not say Wren's name. She did not need to. Every eye in the hall found her anyway, and Wren felt the weight of that attention settle over her like something with actual physical mass. If you've ever had a room full of strangers decide something about your life before you'd said a single word yourself, you already know exactly how this felt. Like this if you want to see Wren take her own voice back in this story. The magistrate continued, her tone unchanged, that the coven's concern was not merely Kendrick's conduct but the status of the human he had allegedly pledged. Whether that pledge carried any binding weight the coven itself might now be obligated to enforce, regardless of what had happened between Wren and Emerich since. The Bamira, seated among the noble houses, rose without waiting to be recognized.
With respect, magistrate, the girl in question has since been claimed, witnessed before a coven elder of standing. Whatever pledge Kendrick made privately years ago was made before that claim existed. Surely the more recent, properly witnessed act takes precedence.
The magistrate considered this with the same unhurried care she brought to everything, and said only that the coven would need to examine both matters fully before reaching any conclusion. That a witness claim and a prior pledge were not, in coven law, automatically exclusive of one another, however much everyone in this hall might wish they were. Kendrick stood near the rear of the hall throughout the entire audience, exactly where an advisor of his standing was expected to stand, his expression arranged into precisely the right measure of grave concern for a court facing an unfamiliar accusation. Wren watched him from across the hall, searching his face for even the smallest fracture, and found none. Whatever he felt hearing his own crime described aloud to the assembled nobility, he had apparently decided, long before this moment, exactly how it should look on his face.
Magistrate, if I may, this court would of course cooperate fully with any lawful coven inquiry. I trust you'll extend us the same courtesy of a fair and thorough hearing before any judgment is reached.
The magistrate turned to look at him for the first time since entering the hall, a long, unhurried study that seemed to take in considerably more than his carefully composed face offered. She said only that fairness was, in fact, precisely what the coven intended and that thoroughness was rarely quick. Kendrick thanked her for her patience, bowed with exactly the correct depth for his rank, and said nothing further for the remainder of the audience. Wren didn't sleep that night, turning the phrase over and over, not automatically exclusive of one another, as though her whole future might simply be a matter of which older document won out over which newer one, decided by people who had never once asked what she wanted any of it to mean. She found Hesper awake too, mending a torn sleeve by candlelight rather than sleeping.
You should rest.
How am I supposed to rest when a stranger might decide by the end of this week that I belong to a debt instead of to myself?
You don't. Whatever she decides, you don't belong to anyone's debt. I don't care what old coven paper says otherwise.
I appreciate that. I'm not certain the coven shares your opinion.
The second near miss came the following evening in the map room, where Emerich had taken to pacing in the hours after each audience as though the room's familiar walls might steady him where nothing else currently could. Wren found him mid-stride and made the mistake of stepping directly into his path rather than around it. The candles had burned low, and in the dimness his eyes seemed darker than usual even before he turned toward her.
Wren.
I need to talk to you.
Not right now. Not this close, please.
She held her ground a moment longer than she should have, watching his eyes darken past the point she'd learned to recognize as the edge of his control. The air between them gone taut in a way that made her own pulse quicken, despite every instinct telling her to step back before finally stepping aside.
6 days since I fed. That should be nothing. That should be well within what I can manage. And I am standing here counting the seconds until you leave this room, which tells you exactly how little today has left me with.
Is it her? The magistrate?
It's all of it. Her, the court, the idea that some old coven document might simply decide your life for you, while I stand beside you unable to do anything but watch. I don't know how to be calm about that, Wren. I'm not sure I want to learn.
She left him to it, understanding for the first time that his control wasn't only a matter of blood and proximity, that fear apparently spent from the same account. Zbigniew and Lubomira left for Wolfharbor themselves 2 mornings later, a journey Zbigniew insisted on making personally, rather than trusting to another messenger.
If Christian will speak to anyone from this court, it will be an elder who remembers what he actually was before the exile, not a stranger asking questions on a king's behalf. I intend to be that elder.
And I intend to make certain nothing happens to either of you on that road that isn't already accounted for.
Be careful, both of you.
We intend to be considerably more than careful. We intend to come back with the one thing that ends this cleanly, if the man is willing to give it to us.
Wren embraced Zbigniew before he could protest the informality of it, something she had never quite done before, and felt him go still with surprise before, after a moment returning it stiffly.
I intend to return, girl. Save the sentiment for when I've earned it by actually succeeding.
Consider it earned in advance, just in case.
Emerich watched them go from the battlement above the gate, Wren beside him, both of them silent until the riders had shrunk to small dark shapes against the frozen road.
I should have gone myself.
You're the king. You can't simply leave while a coven magistrate sits in your own guest quarters weighing my future.
I'm aware. I dislike it regardless.
They rode out before the frost had fully lifted from the courtyard stones, leaving Wren, Emerich, and the magistrate's patient, unhurried presence to occupy the same castle for however many days it took them to return. And every one of those days, Wren understood, would be a day the coven's judgment crept closer to a conclusion. None of them had any say in reaching. Kendrick requested his own private audience with the magistrate on the 4th day, a request that reached Emerich only after it had already been granted, which told Wren, when she heard of it, everything she needed to know about how carefully Kendrick had begun managing his own exposure. He emerged from that audience composed as ever and sought out Emerich directly rather than waiting to be summoned, a boldness Wren hadn't expected from a man under active coven investigation.
My king, might I have a moment? I believe I can offer a resolution that spares everyone considerable difficulty.
I'm listening.
I understand the magistrate's presence has caused considerable strain on this household. I take no pleasure in that, whatever you may currently believe of me. I've served this crown faithfully for 30 years, and I would like the chance to serve it well one final time by offering the cleanest possible resolution to a matter that threatens to unsettle this court for far longer than it needs to.
Faithfully. That word means something different to me than it apparently does to you.
Kendrick's expression did not change, though something in the set of his shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly.
The magistrate's concern, as I understand it, rests on whether a pledge I made years ago retains any force against a claim made since. But consider, the witnessed claim you performed yourself, before a coven elder of standing is by its nature a superseding act. Coven law has always favored the most recent lawful act over an older, informal one. If the claim stands as valid, and it plainly does, then whatever I may or may not have arranged years ago becomes legally irrelevant. There would be nothing left for the coven to weigh regarding the girl at all, only my own conduct, which I am fully prepared to answer for separately.
Wren, listening from just outside the chamber door left carelessly ajar, felt something cold settle low in her stomach. He wasn't defending himself. He was offering to trade his own guilt for her erasure from the proceedings entirely, removing her as evidence so cleanly that whatever he'd done to arrange her presence at this court would never need to be examined at all.
You're asking me to let the coven judge only your conduct and set aside entirely what that conduct was in service of.
I'm suggesting the cleanest resolution for everyone involved, my king, including her. Would she truly prefer months of coven scrutiny into her own history, into every detail of how she came to this castle, merely to see me punished a few degrees more thoroughly than I otherwise would be? I rather thought protecting her from that scrutiny was precisely what you and I both wanted.
Wren pushed the door open before she'd fully decided to, done listening from the corridor.
Don't speak for what I want. Not after everything.
Kendrick's composure didn't crack, not visibly, though something in his eyes shifted at finding her there, evidently having heard more of the conversation than he'd accounted for.
Wren, I only meant to spare you further difficulty.
You meant to spare yourself a full accounting. There's a difference, and I think you know it better than anyone in this castle.
I'll consider what you've proposed, Kendrick. That's all I'll promise you today.
That's more than fair, my king. I only ask that you consider it quickly. The magistrate strikes me as a woman who values efficiency, and a swift resolution reflects well on this entire court, yours included.
I said I'll consider it, not that I'll be rushed into it.
Kendrick inclined his head, the picture of gracious patience. Though Wren, still standing in the doorway, thought she caught something calculating pass behind his eyes before the practiced warmth resettled over his features. If you've ever watched someone try to talk their way out of consequences using the exact same gentle reasonableness that got them this far in the first place, you already know how unsettling it is to watch it almost work. Tell me in the comments whether you think Emerich should have let him finish that sentence at all. Kendrick withdrew with the bow precisely correct for the moment, and Wren stood in the empty chamber afterward, shaking with an anger that had nowhere yet to go. The third near miss arrived that same night, sharper than either of the two before it, and this time it was fear rather than proximity or feeding that seemed to drive it. Emerich found her first for once, appearing in her doorway before she'd even changed for bed, his expression carrying something she hadn't seen on him since the corridor fight all those weeks ago.
I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it before the magistrate rules on anything.
You're frightening me.
Good. I'm frightened too, and I would rather we be frightened together than have you think I'm handling this with any calm I don't actually possess. If she rules, the pledge stands. If the coven decides you belong to some resolution I have no say in, I do not know what I will do. I do not know if I can simply stand there and accept it the way a king is supposed to accept a lawful ruling.
Emerich?
I have fed twice today. Twice, and it has done almost nothing, because the thing threatening to break my control isn't hunger at all. It's the possibility of losing you to a piece of paper older than either of us, and I don't have centuries of practice restraining myself against that.
His hands, she noticed, were trembling faintly where they hung at his sides, not with the tightly leashed hunger she'd learned to recognize, but with something closer to raw fear given nowhere useful to go. She had never once seen him tremble before, not even in the corridor with the stranger's blade drawn against her. She crossed the distance between them slowly, watching him carefully for any sign she should stop, and found none.
Then let's make sure she doesn't have to rule that way. I want to speak to her myself. Not through you, not through Zevignew when he returns, not through anyone standing between me and my own case.
The magistrate hasn't summoned you directly.
Then I'll go without being summoned? I am done being a subject other people argue about in rooms I'm not permitted to enter.
Something in his expression shifted at that, fear giving ground just slightly to something that looked almost like pride.
That's either the bravest thing you've said all week or the most reckless.
You know my answer to that by now.
She requested her own audience the following morning, A request the magistrate's silent second carried away without comment and returned within the hour to grant. The magistrate received her alone this time in the same small council chamber where the first private audience had been held, and gestured Wren to the single chair opposite her own without preamble. If you've been waiting for Wren to finally get a voice in her own story, this is the chapter. Subscribe so you don't miss what she actually says, and I promise it's worth the wait.
I want to speak for myself. Not through the king, not through anyone else who's been arguing my case for me since you arrived.
The magistrate studied her for a long moment before answering, an appraisal Wren forced herself to hold steady beneath.
Kendrick chose you before you knew his name. I understand that. What I don't think anyone in this castle has properly asked me is whether being chosen is the same as belonging to someone. And I'd like the chance to answer that question myself, in my own words, before you decide anything about my life at all.
The magistrate's expression, for the first time since her arrival, showed something that wasn't careful neutrality. A flicker of genuine interest quickly folded back beneath practiced composure. She asked Wren to continue. I didn't choose to come to this castle. I didn't choose to be selected the way Kendrick apparently selected me, and I certainly didn't choose whatever debt he owes a man I've never met. But I chose to stay after the wine cup. I chose to investigate what Kendrick was hiding, at real risk to myself. I chose to be claimed, and I chose to stay claimed every single day since, knowing exactly what it cost the man who claimed me. If coven law wants to weigh a pledge made about a person I hadn't yet become against choices I've made every day as the person I actually am, then I would ask you to weigh which of those two things is more real. The magistrate said nothing for a long moment, and Wren made herself hold the silence rather than fill it. She said finally that she would consider it. She said it was, in her considerable experience, one of the more genuinely difficult arguments anyone had made to her in years, and that she did not say that lightly or often.
Can I ask you one more thing, honestly?
The magistrate inclined her head, permission enough.
Have you ever ruled on something like this before? Where the person the law was arguing about actually stood in front of you and argued back?
The magistrate was quiet long enough that Wren wondered if she'd overstepped after all. She said eventually that she had presided over a great many cases in a great many centuries, and that most of the people whose lives those rulings shaped had never once been given the chance, or perhaps had never once taken it, to stand in a room and speak for themselves the way Wren just had. She said she found she would remember this particular hearing regardless of how she ultimately ruled, which was not something she could say of most of them. That admission, small as it was, felt to Wren like the first genuinely human thing the magistrate had offered since arriving at Sepulchretop's gate. The days that followed passed slowly, the household settling into a strange, watchful rhythm around the magistrate's continued presence, court business conducted in whispers, servants finding excuses to avoid the guest wing entirely, the whole castle waiting for news from a road none of them could see. Hesper found ways to fill the waiting that Wren was grateful for even when she didn't have the energy to properly show it. Small tasks invented to keep both of them occupied, meals brought whether or not either of them felt like eating, company offered without demanding conversation in return.
You've barely eaten in 3 days.
I keep thinking if I stop moving long enough to eat properly, I'll have to actually sit with how frightened I am.
That's exactly backward, and you know it. Eat something. Frightened people still need to eat.
Wren managed a small laugh despite herself, the first in what felt like a long while.
When did you get so sensible?
Around the same time you started getting claimed by kings and investigated by covens. Somebody in this friendship had to stay sensible. I nominated myself.
It was the small, ordinary kindness of it. Sensible Hesper, insisting on bread and broth in the middle of a crisis neither of them could control. That carried Wren through the worst of the waiting, one unremarkable meal at a time. The days that followed passed slowly for Emerich as well, though he wore it differently. Pacing the map room at hours Wren was fairly certain he no longer bothered pretending were for anything but pacing, heating more often than his usual schedule required, as though sheer repetition might eventually buy him the margin his control needed. Zitmignew and Lubomira returned on the 6th day, travel-worn and grim in a way that told Wren, before either of them said a word, that whatever they brought back wasn't the clean victory they'd ridden out hoping for. Zitnia requested an audience with Emerich, Wren, and the magistrate together, the first time all 4 of them had occupied the same room since her arrival. Hesper had met them at the gate before anyone else and walked with them as far as the council chamber door, close enough to overhear Libelmira mutter that the road to Wolfharbor had been considerably harder going than the road back. Ice and a fallen bridge, and a night spent sheltering in a shepherd's abandoned hut rather than risk the frozen river crossing in the dark.
I found Christian. He is alive, and he is exactly as bitter as 3 centuries of exile would make any man. He confirmed everything. The debt, the promise turning, the reason Kendrick had him removed in the first place. He confirmed it to me personally. As an old friend, he still, apparently, trusts more than he trusts this court.
Then we have him, the testimony that ends this.
We have his word given to me privately on a road outside Wolfharbor with no coven witness present. He refuses to come to Sepulchretop himself, and he refuses to put anything in writing that could be traced back to him. He said, and I am quoting him precisely, that he spent 300 years learning what this court does to men who trust it, and he does not intend to learn that lesson twice.
The silence that followed was worse in its way than any of the near Mrs. Wren had weathered so far.
We have the truth. We simply cannot prove it in any form the coven will accept as binding.
The magistrate absorbed this without visible reaction, though Wren, watching closely now, thought she saw something shift briefly behind the careful stillness of her face. She said that an elder's own sworn account of what he was told, even secondhand, carried some weight under coven law, though considerably less than direct testimony would have. She said it was not nothing. She said it was also, plainly, not enough to settle the matter cleanly on its own. Emerich's hands had curled into fists at his side sometime during Zbigniew's account, and Wren watched him fight visibly now for something that no longer looked like ordinary restraint.
Then what would be enough? Tell me plainly what you actually need, and I will find a way to get it to you, whatever it costs.
The magistrate said she intended to render a decision regardless within the day, using everything currently before her: Zbigniew's account, Wren's own testimony, the hiring ledger Kendrick had never managed to explain, and Kendrick's own suspiciously convenient argument for erasing Wren from the proceedings entirely, which she said she found, on reflection, considerably more damning than reassuring. Wren watched Emerich control fray further with every word, his breathing gone shallow and controlled in the specific way she now recognized as a man counting seconds rather than simply breathing.
Emerich, look at me.
He did, though it visibly cost him something to manage it, his eyes gone nearly black, the muscle in his jaw working hard enough that she could see it from across the room.
I'm trying very hard not to do something that would make this considerably worse for both of us.
Then don't. Stay here. Stay with me. Whatever she decides, we face it exactly the way we said we would.
She crossed to him despite Zbigniew's sharp intake of breath behind her and took his hand in both of hers, feeling the tremor running through it.
I don't know if I can promise to be calm about this.
I'm not asking you to be calm. I'm asking you to stay standing next to me instead of somewhere else entirely. There's a difference.
Slowly, by degrees, the black in his eyes receded. Not fully, but enough that she could see the gray underneath again, watching her with an intensity that had nothing to do with hunger at all. Zbigniew described the meeting itself more fully only when Wren pressed him for it later that same evening, the two of them alone in the low archive where she had first learned what she was.
He lives in a cottage at the edge of Wolfharbor's poorest quarter, alone with a garden he tends obsessively and speaks to more than he speaks to any living person, from what I could tell. He recognized me before I'd said a word. 3 centuries, and he still recognized me on sight.
What was he like? Before I ask anything else, I want to understand that.
Proud, once. I remember him proud. What's left of that pride now is smaller and sharper, like a blade worn down to something you'd cut yourself on by accident rather than intention. He asked after people who have been dead for 200 years before he asked after Kendrick at all. I don't think he'd let himself think about Kendrick in a long while, and I watched it cost him considerably to start again.
Did he want to be free of the exile? Truly?
He wanted, more than anything I could name, for someone to finally believe him, not to fix it. Not even, I think, to see Kendrick punished, though he wouldn't weep over it.
Just to be believed after 3 centuries of being the exile everyone assumed had earned it. When I told him we already did believe him, he wept. An old vampire weeping over a garden gone to frost because 2 people from a court that exiled him finally thought he might have been telling the truth all along. Wren felt something in her chest tighten at that, some fellow feeling she hadn't expected to find in a man she'd never met.
Then why won't he come? If we believe him, if it might finally clear his name.
Because belief from two travelers on a frozen road cost him nothing to receive and nothing to lose if we're wrong. Belief from the full coven, tested and weighed and possibly found insufficient after everything, could cost him the last shred of dignity he has left. He would rather remain the bitter exile everyone assumes he is than risk becoming, once more, publicly, the man everyone decided wasn't worth trusting. I understood that reasoning even as I hated it.
Wren sat with that for a long moment, turning it over the way she turned over most things now, searching for the version of it she could actually live inside.
Then we don't ask him to trust the coven. We find another way. There has to be one.
I hope so, girl. I genuinely hope so.
The magistrate called the full court together the following evening. The great hall filled past capacity for the first time since the night Emerich had knelt in it. Every noble house and every servant who could find a reason to be present crowded along the walls to watch a judgment none of them had any power to change. Kendrick stood in his customary place near the rear, composure intact, though Wren, watching him now with the particular clarity of someone who had spent weeks learning exactly what to look for, thought his stillness had taken on a slightly different quality than before. Less patient, more rigid, the way a man holds himself when patience has finally run out of road. The magistrate spoke without preamble once the hall had settled. She said the coven's investigation had confirmed, beyond reasonable dispute, that Kendrick had orchestrated Wren's placement in this household years in advance, funded and exiled Vampire's silence and cooperation for the better part of a year, and attempted, upon discovery, to manipulate the court's own legal proceedings to erase the evidence of his conduct entirely, rather than answer for it honestly.
I acted to protect this crown from scandal. Whatever else you believe of my methods, that much was always true.
The magistrate turned the full weight of her attention on him for the first time since the audience began. She said that protecting a crown from scandal and protecting oneself from consequence had, in her considerable experience, an unfortunate tendency to look identical from the inside, and that 30 years of gentle wisdom did not exempt a man from telling the two apart honestly when the moment finally demanded it of him. Kendrick had no answer for that. For the first time since Wren had known him, he simply had nothing further to say, and the silence that followed told the hall more plainly than any accusation could have. The hall had gone utterly silent. Wren felt Emerich's hand tighten around hers, though he held perfectly still beside her, exactly as he'd promised. Luomira, standing near the front of the assembled noble houses, watched the exchange with an expression Wren had rarely seen on her before, something close to open vindication. Though she kept her posture composed enough that only someone who'd spent weeks learning her particular stillness would have caught it at all, the magistrate continued. She said the coven found Kendrick's conduct a clear violation of law regarding the treatment of both an exile's restoration and a human subject's basic standing, and that formal coven judgment against him would follow through proper channels, separate from tonight's proceedings. As to the matter of Wren herself, she said, the coven would not rule that the old pledge voided or superseded the witness claim, nor would it rule the pledge entirely without force given the genuine legal ambiguity both matters presented. Instead, she said, the coven was issuing what its own law termed a provisional standing. Wren's claim would be recognized as valid and binding for all present purposes, but the underlying question of the pledge and what Kendrick's debt to Christian ultimately required to be considered paid would remain formally open, subject to further coven review until Christian himself could be persuaded to provide direct testimony or the matter reached its own natural resolution some other way. Wren felt the relief and the uncertainty arrive together, tangled past, separating, safe for now, but not finished, not resolved. A door left deliberately ajar rather than closed. If this is the kind of ending that makes you need to know what happens next immediately, that's exactly the point. Subscribe, like this if that ruling felt like both a victory and a threat at once, and comment your prediction for what the matter's natural resolution ends up actually meaning. Kendrick did not wait for the hall to fully absorb the ruling before withdrawing his bow to the magistrate and to Emerich, both correct in form and, for the first time Wren had ever witnessed, visibly hollow in substance. The magistrate withdrew from the hall shortly after, pausing only once, at the edge of the days to exchange a few final words with Emerich that Wren was too far away to hear. The court dispersed slowly afterward, the great hall emptying by degrees, as the shock of a genuinely unresolved verdict settled over a household that had wanted, more than anything, a clean ending. Hesper found Wren before she could slip away entirely, pulling her into a fierce, brief embrace amid the dispersing crowd.
Provisional. I don't even fully understand what that word means, and I already hate it.
It means we keep fighting. That's all it ever really meant, if I'm honest.
Then we keep fighting. I didn't walk you through 2 seasons of this castle's nonsense just to stop now.
Lubomira caught her a moment later, composed as ever despite the road dust still clinging to her traveling clothes, though something in her bearing had softened since the night she'd first delivered her warning in a quiet corridor, seasons ago now.
For what it's worth, I think she ruled correctly. Not kindly. Correctly. There's a difference, and I suspect you're the only one in this hall besides myself who fully appreciates it.
I'll take correct. Kind can wait.
Lubomira allowed herself something that might, in a dimmer light, have passed for a genuine smile. Zibinia found Wren last of all, waiting until the hall had nearly emptied before approaching, his expression carrying the particular weariness of a man who had ridden hard for days, only to arrive home to more uncertainty rather than less.
Provisional was not the ruling I hoped to bring you home to. I want you to know that. I had hoped my account of Christian would settle this cleanly, and it did not, and I find I am considerably more frustrated by that than I expected to be at my age.
You gave her everything you had. That's not nothing. Whatever the word provisional makes it feel like tonight.
No, it is not nothing, but it is also not finished, and I confess I had hoped, after everything, to bring you an ending rather than another beginning.
Then we'll find the ending together. You've already ridden halfway across the realm for me once. I'm not expecting you to do all the rest of it alone.
Something in the old vampire's weathered face eased, just slightly at that.
No, I don't suppose you are. Get some rest, girl. Tomorrow this castle will still need looking after, provisional ruling or not.
Emerich found Wren on the north battlement well past midnight. Where she had gone, she realized, out of habit as much as any conscious choice.
She said something to me as she left the hall, the magistrate.
What did she say?
That she'd expected to find a king too proud to hear an outsider question his own household. She said she found something different instead, and that she'd remember it, regardless of how this all eventually resolves.
That sounds almost like a compliment.
From her, I suspect it was the closest thing to one I'm likely to get. I found I didn't mind it. Provisional, I keep turning the word over and it keeps meaning less the longer I look at it.
It means we're safe. For now.
For now is not the same as safe, and we both know it.
She leaned into him and felt him let her, his arm coming around her shoulders with a steadiness that had cost him, she knew now, considerably more than it appeared to.
Then we use whatever time for now gives us. We find Christian ourselves if we have to. We finish this properly on our own terms before the coven's patience runs out and decides it for us.
Together.
Together, always that part at least isn't provisional.
He turned her gently to face him, tilting her chin up with 2 fingers the way he had so many times before, in so many different rooms of this castle, across a season that had changed nearly everything about them both.
Whatever the coven ultimately decides about that old pledge, I want you to hear this plainly, the way you've taught me to say things plainly instead of only implying them. I am not waiting for a ruling to know what I choose. I chose you the night you spilled that wine, and I choose you again tonight, provisional standing or not, and I will keep choosing you every single day this drags on for as long as it takes.
Wren felt something in her chest loosen that had been wound tight since the moment the magistrate first said the word provisional.
Then let's make sure it doesn't take forever. I'd like my life back eventually, fully mine, not provisional at all.
I intend to help you get it, whatever that requires.
Below them, past the frost, the letter said on the map table, sealed, addressed in Wren's own careful hand to a man in Wolfharbor she had never once written to before, and Emerich noticed it before he'd asked her a single question about it.
You've already decided then?
I decided 3 days ago. I only finished the wording tonight.
He picked it up, turned it once between his fingers without breaking the seal, and set it back down exactly where it had been.
Read it to me anyway. I'd rather hear it from you than imagine it.
2 weeks had passed since the magistrate's ruling, and provisional had settled over Sepulchretop the way frost settles over stone. present in every room, mentioned in none of them, felt by everyone regardless. The household had stopped whispering about it mostly, though Wren still caught servants glancing at her throat sometimes, as though the two small marks there might finally reveal, on any given morning, which way her fate had tipped overnight. Hesper had taken to visiting her most evenings regardless, refusing to let the waiting become a habit either of them settled comfortably into.
Still no word from Wolfharbor?
Nothing? Sebignew's contact promised to send anything the moment there was something worth sending, and I believe him. And I still check the courtyard gate more often than I'd like to admit.
That's not a flaw. That's just being a person who's waited long enough to stop pretending waiting doesn't cost anything.
Wren managed something close to a real smile at that, the first in days. The magistrate remained in her guest quarters, patient as ever, attending court business with the same unhurried thoroughness that had first unsettled the whole castle and now, somehow, simply belonged to it. Wren had grown almost used to her presence. Almost.
I told him the truth, that someone tried to have him killed for what he knows, and that I don't intend to let that be the last word on the matter.
You're certain about the attempt?
Sebignew's contact in Wolfharbor confirmed it 3 days ago.
A man matching no description anyone recognized, asking after a reclusive vampire with a garden at the edge of the poorest quarter. Christian wasn't home when he came. That's the only reason we're not delivering a very different kind of letter tonight. Emerich's jaw tightened. The particular tightness she'd learned meant he was containing something considerably larger than the moment currently required.
Kendrick.
Kendrick. He couldn't erase the evidence through the magistrate's proceedings, so he tried to erase the witness instead.
Neither of them said anything for a long moment, the weight of it settling into the room alongside the candlelight and the frost pressing at the windows.
Send it. Whatever it costs to reach him quickly, spend it.
If you've ever watched someone finally run out of patience with waiting for a system to move on its own, this is that moment. Subscribe if you want to see what happens when Wren stops waiting for the coven and starts acting for herself, like this. If that attempt on Christian's life made your blood run as cold as it made hers, and tell me in the comments whether you think Kendrick just made the worst mistake of his very long life. Sebignew read the letter over Wren's shoulder before it was sealed for delivery, nodding slowly at each line.
This is good, direct, honest, and it gives him something no one else has offered him in 3 centuries, the truth, delivered by someone with nothing to gain from lying to him.
Do you think it will work?
I think a man who has spent 3 centuries being disbelieved finally has proof that someone believed him enough to try to kill him over it. That is not nothing, girl. That may be everything.
Emerich summoned Kendrick to the map room that same evening, alone, no witnesses beyond Sebignew standing quietly near the door. Kendrick arrived composed, as he always did now. Though Wren, watching through the gap in the door she'd refused to fully close, thought she saw something new in the set of his shoulders. Not fear exactly, something closer to a man doing careful arithmetic on how much longer his composure needed to hold.
A man was seen in Wolfharbor asking after Christian by description, days before the exile happened to be away from his own cottage. You'll forgive me if I find the timing remarkable.
My king, I have no knowledge of any such man.
I didn't ask whether you knew him. I asked you to forgive my finding the timing remarkable.
Kendrick's composure held, though the pause before he answered ran a beat too long to be entirely comfortable.
I understand your suspicion. I can only tell you, plainly, that I did not send anyone to harm Christian. Whatever else you believe I've done, I have never wished that man dead, only silent.
Those aren't nearly as different as you seem to think they are.
Kendrick had no immediate answer for that, and the silence stretched long enough that even Sebignew, watching from the doorway, shifted his weight almost imperceptibly.
I've served this crown for 30 years, my king. I would ask you to weigh that service against a coincidence of timing before you decide what I am and am not capable of.
I have waited 30 years of service and a year of secret payments to an exile, and a hiring ledger that put a servant girl in front of me years before I ever noticed her. And now a stranger asking after that same exile days before he happens to vanish from his own cottage. I find the weighing considerably less flattering to you than you seem to.
I will submit to whatever inquiry the magistrate wishes to conduct regarding this. I have nothing further to hide.
You said something similar about the ledger and the hiring records. I find your definition of nothing keeps expanding to fit whatever's already been found.
Kendrick bowed, correct as always, and withdrew without further defense, and Wren, still watching from the doorway, thought that was perhaps the first time she had ever seen him leave a room without the last word. The near miss caught Emerich only minutes later, once Kendrick's footsteps had faded down the corridor and the fury he'd been containing finally had nowhere left to hide. Wren found him with both hands braced against the map table, head bowed, breathing in the controlled, counted way she now recognized instantly.
Emerich,
Give me a moment, please.
you fed yesterday?
I know precisely when I fed. It has nothing to do with that, and everything to do with how badly I want to have handled that conversation with my hands instead of my patience.
She waited, saying nothing, until his breathing evened and the black receded enough from his eyes that she trusted herself close enough to touch his arm.
I keep thinking about how close it came. Not the debt, not the pledge. How close a stranger's blade came to ending a man's life on a frozen road over a truth Kendrick decided was more dangerous to him than a death would be to anyone else.
He'll answer for it. Properly, do the magistrate, where it actually means something.
I know. Knowing doesn't make patience feel like enough some nights.
She stayed with him until his hands finally stopped their faint trembling entirely, neither of them speaking further. The map room's candlelight burning low around them. The magistrate summoned all of them formally 2 days later, her expression carrying a gravity Wren hadn't seen from her since the night of the ruling. She stated plainly that the coven considered an attempt on a material witness's life, connected however indirectly to an ongoing coven inquiry, a matter of the utmost seriousness, serious enough that formal proceedings against Kendrick would now move forward regardless of whether Christian ever agreed to testify at all.
What changes exactly? Practically, I mean.
The magistrate said that the coven no longer needed to weigh Kendrick's original conduct against ambiguous or secondhand evidence alone. An attempted murder connected to an active inquiry was, in coven law, sufficient grounds on its own to strip a man of standing, regardless of how the underlying debt was ultimately resolved. She said further that she had already dispatched her own inquiry into the attempt itself, independent of anything Wren's household had uncovered.
Then we have him, finally cleanly regardless of what Christian chooses.
The magistrate agreed that the attempt itself, confirmed independently through coven sources in Wolfharbor, constituted sufficient grounds to proceed. She said formal judgment would be rendered within the week and that Kendrick would be given the opportunity, as coven law required, to answer the charges directly before any sentence was passed. Wren left that audience lighter than she'd felt in weeks, though the lightness came tangled with something she hadn't expected. A small, unwelcome flicker of pity for a man who had, in the end, undone himself trying to survive the very exposure he'd spent 3 centuries avoiding. Christian's answer arrived 4 days later, carried not by a rider but by Zubelmira herself, who had ridden to Wolfharbor a second time the moment word of the attempt reached her, unwilling to trust so delicate a matter to anyone else. She found Wren in the low archive, travel-worn but unmistakably satisfied, and set a single folded letter on the table between them before saying a word.
He'll testify, formally before the coven in his own words. He asked me to tell you specifically that it wasn't your letter that changed his mind. Not entirely. It was being believed enough to be worth killing over. He said that was the first time in 3 centuries anyone had proven it with more than words.
Wren felt something in her chest that had been clenched tight since the night of the letter finally loosened, just slightly.
He's coming here? To Sepulchretop?
He is. Under coven protection this time, not alone on a frozen road. I made certain of that personally before I left.
Thank you for going back, for not waiting to be asked.
I told you once that I'd rather treat the symptom kindly than let the disease run its course unchecked. I meant it then. I mean it rather more now.
Isn't it strange how the smallest kindness can end up mattering more than the biggest argument ever could? Tell me if you've ever had someone show up for you the way Lubomira just showed up for Wren, without being asked twice. Wren carried the news to Emerich herself, finding him on the north battlement in the last hour before dawn, where he had taken to standing more nights than not since the ruling.
He's coming.
He's coming. Under coven protection. Lubomira made certain of it.
Something in Emerich's shoulders eased for the first time in what felt to Wren like weeks, though his eyes, when they found hers, still carried a caution that hadn't fully released.
Then this actually ends properly. Not provisional, not open. End it.
It ends. Whatever comes after that is ours to decide. Finally, without anyone else's law hanging over it.
Do you know what I keep thinking about? Not the ruling. Not even Kendrick, honestly. I keep thinking about the wine cup. How small that moment was in the end compared to everything it became. I knelt for a servant girl carrying a tray, and here we are, seasons later, having survived a coven inquiry together.
I think about it too. Usually at the worst possible moments, which I've decided is probably fitting, given how the whole thing started.
He drew her close, and for the first time since the magistrate's arrival, she felt him hold her, without any part of him counting seconds or measuring distance at all. Christian arrived at Sepulchretop 6 days later under a coven honor guard, a small, careful procession that drew every eye in the castle the moment it passed through the outer gate. Wren watched from the same window she had watched the magistrate's own arrival from seasons ago now, and thought how strange it was that an exile's return could feel, in its own way, just as heavy with consequence as a stranger's first arrival had. He was smaller than she pictured him somehow, though Zbigniew's own description should have prepared her for that, a stooped, careful man with old eyes set in a face that had spent 3 centuries learning not to expect kindness and was visibly, painfully unused to receiving any now. Zbigniew met him at the gate personally, and Wren watched the 2 old vampires embrace briefly, wordlessly, in a way that told her more about the weight of their shared history than any account Zbigniew had given her yet. Zbigniew found her later that same evening, his expression unusually unguarded.
He asked after you, wanted to know what kind of person writes a letter like that to a stranger who tried to have him killed by proxy.
What did you tell him?
You were considerably braver than most people twice your age, and considerably more stubborn than anyone I've known in longer than I care to admit. He said that sounded like someone worth finally trusting a court again for.
The formal proceeding convened 3 days after that. Before the full court once more, the great hall filled past capacity for the second time this season. Christian gave his testimony plainly, without embellishment, describing the debt, the promise, and the 3 centuries of silence Kendrick had bought and paid for in equal measure. He spoke of the woman whose name he still would not say aloud, of the exile that had cost him everything he'd once been, and of a stranger's blade on a frozen road that had finally cost Kendrick the only thing he'd managed to protect through all of it, the appearance of innocence. Wren watched Zbigniew's face through the whole of it and saw something settle there that looked almost like peace. The particular satisfaction of a man who had ridden hard on a frozen road for exactly this outcome, and finally, after everything, gotten it. Kendrick offered no further defense. There was, by that point, nothing left to offer. The magistrate rendered judgment before the hall had finished absorbing the testimony itself. She stripped Kendrick of his standing at court and within the coven both, effective immediately, and remanded him to coven custody for a reckoning that, she said plainly, would not be provisional in any sense of the word. If this is the moment you've been waiting 3 episodes for, you're not alone. Like this, if watching Kendrick finally answer for everything felt as satisfying as it should. Kendrick said nothing as the coven guard escorted him from the hall. He did not bow. For the first time since Wren had known him, he did not perform anything at all. Kendrick's sentencing left a strange, unfinished quiet behind it, the kind that follows an ending too large to fully absorb in a single evening. The court dispersed slowly, servants and nobles alike, drifting toward their own private processing of what they'd just witnessed, and Wren found herself standing in the emptying hall long after she'd meant to leave it, simply breathing in a version of Sepulchretop that no longer had Kendrick's careful gentleness woven through every corner of it. Zbigniew found her there, Christian, a quiet presence beside him, still travel-worn despite days of rest, his old eyes taking in the hall with an expression Wren couldn't quite read.
It's done, girl, truly done. I confess I hadn't fully believed I'd live to see it, and I've lived considerably longer than most things get the chance to.
Thank you, both of you. I don't think I've said that properly yet.
You've said it plainly enough in everything you did to get us here. Words are simply the last part of it.
Christian's voice, when it came, was quieter than she'd expected, worn thin by centuries but not unkind. Christian said simply that he was the one who owed thanks, and that he intended to spend whatever years the coven eventually restored to him learning how to accept kindness again, without immediately searching it for a hidden cost. He said Wren's letter had been the first thing in 3 centuries that hadn't asked anything of him in return, and that he doubted he'd ever fully stop being surprised by that. Wren felt something in her chest ache gently at that. grief and hope, tangled together in a way she was beginning to understand, simply came with caring about people whose lives had been shaped by loss long before she'd ever met them. Emerich found her an hour later in the map room, standing before the same table where a letter had once sat sealed and waiting, though nothing waited on it now.
I keep expecting to feel finished. I don't quite. Is that strange?
No, I think finished isn't really what this is. I think this is just the part where we finally get to decide what comes next, instead of having it decided for us.
He crossed to her slowly, and for the first time in longer than either of them could easily measure, she watched him move without any trace of the careful, counted restraint that had shadowed nearly every moment they'd shared since the wine cup.
Then let's decide together. I have a question I've been holding since long before any magistrate ever walked through that gate, and I find I no longer have any reason left to keep holding it.
Ask it?
Stay with me. Not provisionally, not as a claim a coven might someday reweigh, not as a debt anyone tried to make of you. I'm asking whether you'll choose to become what I am, freely, on our own terms, witnessed properly, wanted by both of us before anyone else ever gets a vote in it again. The weight of the question settled over her slowly, not with fear, though fear lived somewhere inside it too, but with a clarity she hadn't expected to feel so completely.
I thought about this more than you know. Since the ledger, since the magistrate, since long before either of those. If I'm honest with myself, I don't want to become this because Kendrick decided I should. I want to choose it because it's you, and because I've watched what it costs you to love me as a mortal woman, running out of years faster than either of us wants to think about. And because I would rather spend forever learning what you are than spend the rest of a shorter life wondering.
You understand what you'd be giving up. Sunlight. The people you've known, the particular ordinary weight of being human, which I remember less clearly with every century and still somehow miss.
I understand what I'm choosing toward, more than what I'm giving up. That's the difference, I think, between being claimed and choosing to stay.
I need you to be certain, not brave, not simply willing to mash whatever I'm offering. Certain, in the quiet, unglamorous way that has nothing to do with anyone watching.
I am certain. I have been certain since the second near miss if I trace it back honestly. The night I understood that whatever this cost either of us, I would rather carry the cost with you than carry an easier life without you.
This was the moment 3 episodes of Coven law, careful investigation, and hard-won trust had all been quietly building toward not a debt finally paid, but a choice finally entirely her own to make, spoken freely in a quiet room with no court, no coven, and no watching crowd to answer to but each other. They brought the choice to Zbigniew and the magistrate together the following morning, both of whom listened with the particular gravity the moment demanded before either spoke at all.
A witness turning, properly conducted, chosen freely by both parties. I have stood witness to considerably fewer good ones than bad ones in my long life. I would be honored to stand witness to this.
The magistrate said she would remain to witness it herself on the coven's behalf, and that a turning entered into this plainly, this deliberately after everything Wren had endured to reach this choice on her own terms, was precisely the kind of resolution coven law existed to protect rather than complicate.
What do you need from us? Formally, I mean, for it to count as properly witnessed.
The magistrate said only that she required honesty, freely giving consent spoken aloud before witnesses, and a vampire elder of standing to confirm the exchange itself. Zbigniew, she noted, satisfied that requirement more thoroughly than most candidates she'd encountered in her considerable years of service.
I'll stand for it gladly. I stood for the first claim months ago, half uncertain what I was witnessing at the time. I stand for this one with no uncertainty at all.
They performed the exchange that same night in the map room where so much of what mattered between them had already happened. Candlelight low and steady, Zbigniew and the magistrate standing witness near the door while Emerich knelt before Wren the way he once had, seasons ago, in front of an entire court that hadn't understood what it was watching.
This will hurt, more than the claim did. I won't pretend otherwise.
I know. I'm not afraid of the hurting. I'm ready.
Then let it be witnessed, freely given and freely received before all of us gathered here.
The magistrate inclined her head in formal confirmation, and Emerich, at last, drew Wren gently closer, his hand cradling the back of her neck with a tenderness that belied everything the moment was about to demand of them both. He drank first, deliberately drawing her nearly to the edge of what a body could survive. And Wren felt herself grow distant and light in a way that frightened her less than she'd expected. Some old animal instinct recognizing, even through the fear, that this was a beginning rather than an ending. When he drew back, his own wrist already opened. She took what he offered without hesitation. The taste of it sharp and strange and somehow exactly right, and the last thing she remembered before the darkness took her fully was his voice, steady and close, telling her that he would be there when she woke, every single time, for as long as this took. The household learned of it by morning the way it had learned of the claim months before. Not through any announcement, but through the particular quality of silence that settled over Sepulchretop whenever something enormous had happened just out of sight. Hesper found Zbigniew first, catching him in the corridor outside the map room, her face already asking the question before she'd said a word.
Is it true? She's turning.
It's true. Chosen freely, witnessed properly, exactly the way it should have happened from the very beginning, if the world worked the way it's supposed to.
Can I see her?
Not yet. Not until the first night has passed and settled. I know the waiting is hard. It is meant to be borne by those who love her regardless.
I've done considerably harder waiting than this, these past weeks. I can manage a few more nights.
I don't doubt it. You've managed a great deal more than anyone in this castle gave you credit for, myself included, until fairly recently.
Hesper sat with that a long moment, then nodded, and Zbigniew watched something in her small, practical face settle into the same steady determination he'd come to recognize in Wren herself over the long season they'd all just survived. Lubomira found the news delivered to her formally and received it with a composure that didn't fully hide the emotion beneath it.
I confess I didn't expect to care this much how this particular story ended. I find I do, rather more than court composure generally allows.
You're permitted to care, Lubomira. It doesn't diminish you.
I'm aware. I simply hadn't practiced it recently, and I find I'm somewhat out of shape for the feeling.
You practiced it rather well from where I stood. Riding to Wolfharbor twice, arguing precedent before a full court, standing witness to everything this castle has weathered this season. I'd call that considerable practice, however unpracticed it felt to you.
Perhaps. I suppose I'll have ample opportunity to keep practicing, now that the excitement appears to be settling.
I wouldn't count on excitement staying settled for long in this particular household, but I take your meaning.
Christian, still adjusting to a castle that had only recently stopped being the seat of the man who'd exiled him, asked Zbigniew quietly whether he might stay through the turning's completion if it wouldn't trouble anyone.
You've more right to see how this ends than nearly anyone else in this castle. Stay as long as you need to.
The fever began before the sun had fully cleared the eastern towers, and it came on faster and harder than Zbigniew had warned either of them to expect. Wren woke into heat first, a burning that started somewhere beneath her skin and spread outward until she couldn't remember what her body had felt like before it arrived. The map room's candlelight, ordinarily soft, struck her eyes like something with actual weight, and every small sound, the crackle of the fire, Emerich's careful breathing beside her, even the faint settling of old stone somewhere deep in the castle's bones, arrived too loud, too sharp, too much, all at once.
It's too bright. Everything is too loud. What's happening to me?
Exactly what should be happening. Your body is beginning to let go of what it was, and it doesn't let go quietly. I'm here. I'm not leaving this room.
She reached for his hand and found it already waiting and held on through a wave of heat that felt, for one terrifying moment, like being burned alive from somewhere she couldn't locate or escape.
Is it supposed to hurt this much?
Yes, I wish I could tell you otherwise. I remember my own turning less clearly than I'd like, but I remember this part, the fever, the sound, the particular cruelty of a body still deciding what it is.
He pressed a cool cloth to her forehead, useless against heat that came from somewhere the cloth couldn't reach, though the gesture itself steadied her more than the cloth did.
Talk to me, please. I need something besides the burning to listen to.
Then I'll tell you about the first sunrise I remember missing. 1692, I believe, though the years blur more than I'd like to admit. I stood at a window and watched the sky go pink and understood, all at once and completely, that I would never again stand in that particular light without dying for it. I grieved it for decades. I want you to know that grief is allowed, whatever you lose tonight. I will not think less of you for missing the sun.
Did it ever stop hurting? The missing it.
Not entirely. It simply stopped being the only thing I felt when I thought of it. Eventually, other things grew alongside the missing, until the missing was only one part of a considerably larger life. I imagine it will be the same for you, in time.
She managed something between a laugh and a sob at that, gripping his hand tighter as another wave of fever crested and finally, slowly, began to recede.
I don't think I'm grieving the sun yet. I think I'm mostly just trying to survive the next hour.
Then survive the next hour. That's all either of us needs to manage right now.
The fever came in waves the rest of the night, each one arriving with less warning than the last, her skin alternately burning and ice cold beneath his careful hands. Her own pulse, still human, still hers, if only for a while longer, hammering loud enough in her ears that she sometimes couldn't hear him speak until the wave had passed. Between the worst of it, small mercies arrived, a cool cloth pressed gently to her throat, his low voice steady beside her, the particular comfort of a hand that never once let go of hers no matter how tightly she gripped it. The night stretched on in waves, heat, then a brief, merciful clarity, then heat again, each cycle leaving her a little more distant from the body she'd woken into that morning, a little closer to something she didn't yet have words for. Sound sharpened further as the hours passed until she could hear Hesper's soft footsteps pacing the corridor outside, could hear Christian's low voice somewhere further off, asking Zygmunt quiet questions she couldn't quite make out, could hear, beneath everything else, the specific rhythm of her own heartbeat. Still human, still counting down towards something neither of them had said aloud yet. By the time gray dawn light began creeping beneath the map room's heavy curtains, the worst of the fever's first wave had finally broken, leaving her exhausted and strange in her own skin, human still, but only barely, only for a little while longer. The second night arrived quieter than the first, though quieter, Wren was learning, did not mean easier. Her heartbeat had begun to slow sometime during the day, a fact she noticed the way one notices a clock ticking differently than it used to. Not alarming at first, simply strange, until the strangeness itself became its own kind of fear.
It's slower. I can feel it. Is that supposed to happen already?
It is. Tonight your heart begins learning to need less of what it used to need constantly. By tomorrow it will have stopped needing that at all.
That sounds like it's dying.
In a sense, it is. I won't lie to you about that. Not tonight of all nights. The heart that has carried you your whole life is ending. What replaces it isn't lesser. It's simply different. And different frightens people even when it isn't loss.
You keep saying that. That different isn't loss.
Because I need you to believe it before you have to live it. Belief first makes the living considerably easier to bear.
She sat with that a long moment, feeling the strange new slowness in her own chest, and found, beneath the fear, something that surprised her, a kind of quiet mourning she hadn't expected to feel this clearly.
I keep thinking about small things, stupid things. The way sunlight used to feel on my hands in the stable yard, Hesper's terrible singing when she thinks no one's listening. I don't think I'm ready to let go of those, even though I chose this.
You're allowed to mourn what you're leaving even while you walk toward what you're choosing. Those aren't contradictions. I've had centuries to learn that particular lesson, and I still relearn it more often than I'd like.
Would you still mourn, after all this time?
Small things too, oddly enough. The particular sound rain makes on a roof when you're warm and dry beneath it and know without needing to check that morning will come safely. I haven't heard rain quite that way in longer than I can accurately count. I find I still miss it on the right kind of night.
She reached for his hand again, not out of fear this time, but simply because the small human gesture still felt like hers to offer at least for one more night. A new sensation arrived alongside the morning as the night deepened, a low, unfamiliar pull low in her chest that she didn't immediately recognize, until Emerich's own careful stillness told her plainly enough what it was.
I'm hungry. Not for food. For something else. It's that.
That's the beginning of it. The craving. It will grow considerably stronger before tomorrow night, and I want you to understand it now, gently, before it arrives with its full weight. This is what you are becoming. Not a monster. Not a tragedy. Simply a different kind of hunger. One I intend to teach you to carry the way I've learned to carry mine. With control. With choice, with someone beside you who understands exactly what it costs.
if you've made it this far into the story, you already know how much this moment matters. Subscribe if you don't want to miss the third night, like this, if that scene between them means as much to you as it does to her, and tell me in the comments what you think Wren's first sunrise as what she's becoming will actually feel like.
Teach me then. I'd rather learn this from you than be frightened of it alone.
Then let's begin simply. This craving isn't the enemy. Losing yourself to it unexamined is. You'll learn the way I learned, to feel it approaching long before it arrives, and to choose, every time, how you answer it.
How did you learn it, when you were newly turned?
Badly, at first. And slowly after that, I had no one beside me who'd chosen to be there the way you'll have tonight. I learned mostly through mistakes I'd rather not describe in detail, and through decades of simply refusing to let the hunger decide who I was going to be. You'll have an easier road than I did. That's not nothing. I intend to make sure of it.
You make it sound almost bearable.
It is bearable. I'm living proof of that. 300 years and considerably more restraint than I ever expected to develop. You'll manage it. I intend to make certain of that personally, for as long as either of us exists to need it.
She rested her head against his shoulder as the second night wore on, listening to her own heartbeat slow further, feeling the low pull of a need she was only beginning to understand, and found, somewhere in the space between fear and the steady warmth of his presence beside her, something that felt almost like peace.
Will you tell me something true? Does it get easier? Being what you are?
Some parts do. Some parts never fully do, and I've stopped expecting them to. What gets easier, I think, is having someone beside you who chose to be there. I didn't have that for most of my centuries. You're about to have it from your very first night. I believe that changes more than people expect it to.
Then I intend to be considerably grateful for that, once I've finished being terrified of everything else.
Gratitude and terror have shared a room in me for 300 years. You'll find they make surprisingly tolerable companions, given enough time.
By the time the second night finally released its hold toward dawn, her heart had slowed to something barely perceptible even to her own strange sharpening senses, and the craving, though quieter now, had settled into her like something patient, waiting for the night that would finally, fully arrive. The third night came on differently than the two before it, not with fever, not with the slow ache of morning, but with a stillness so complete that for one suspended moment Wren thought, with a calm that frightened her more than any fear had, that she had simply stopped. Her heart, when she reached for its rhythm the way she'd reached for it every hour of the past 2 nights, gave her nothing back at all.
Emerich, I can't feel it. My heart. It's not there anymore.
I know. I've been listening for it to stop all evening. It has. That's exactly right. That's the third night doing precisely what it's meant to do.
I don't feel dead. I thought I would feel dead.
You're not dead. You're between. Tonight the last night of it, if everything continues the way it should. Tomorrow you rise as something whole, not something ended.
She let that settle, turning the word between carefully in her mind, and found it fit better than dying ever could have. She lay very still, cataloging the strangeness of a body that no longer breathed out of necessity, that no longer needed the small, constant rhythm that had carried her through every year of her life until this one. It should have terrified her more than it did. Instead, lying in the candlelit stillness with Emerich's hand wrapped around hers, she found something closer to wonder, waiting beneath the fear.
Tell me what happens when I wake. I want to know before it happens, not after.
You'll wake hungry, more hungry than you've ever been for anything, and it will frighten you before you learn to master it. Your senses will arrive all at once, overwhelming at first before they settle into something you can actually use. You'll be faster than you've ever been, stronger, and none of it will feel like yours yet. That part takes time. I want you prepared for that. The first hours are rarely gentle, whatever the old stories claim.
And you'll be there.
I've not left this room in 3 nights, and I do not intend to leave it now, of all moments.
The hours before dawn passed in a strange, suspended quiet, Wren neither fully present nor fully gone, Emerich keeping his own vigil beside her with a patience that had cost him, she understood now, considerably more than he'd ever let her see the true weight of. Zbigniew looked in once, near midnight, exchanging a few quiet words with Emerich that Wren, in her current state, couldn't quite follow, before withdrawing again to let them keep the last of the vigil alone. The change itself, when it finally came, arrived less like waking and more like surfacing, a sudden total awareness that swept through her all at once, sound and scent and the texture of the air itself arriving with a clarity so overwhelming that for one long moment she couldn't separate any single sensation from the flood of all of them together. She could smell the candle wax, and the old stone, and the frost gathering on the window glass, each scent distinct and enormous, and beneath all of it, the particular warm scent she recognized even now as simply him.
Emerich,
I'm here. Breathe. If the word still means anything to you right now, let it settle. I promise you it settles.
The hunger arrived a heartbeat later, sharp and enormous and entirely unlike anything she'd felt in the 2 nights leading toward it. A need so total it eclipsed thought itself for one dangerous, disorienting instant, her whole awareness narrowing to the warmth she could suddenly overwhelmingly sense in the room around her.
Look at me. Only me. Whatever you're feeling right now, I promise you it has a shape, and I promise you that shape is survivable.
She found his eyes through the chaos of new sensation, storm gray and steady and entirely unafraid, and used them the way she'd used them 100 times before, as an anchor against something too large to face alone.
I want to feed. I don't know how to want anything else right now.
Then feed from me. Properly, safely, the way I should have offered from the very first moment instead of making you wait for it.
Would it hurt you?
Nothing about this could hurt me less. Take what you need. I intend to still be standing here afterward, exactly as certain of this as I was 3 nights ago.
He offered his own wrist without hesitation, and Wren, newborn and overwhelmed and entirely unmoored from everything she'd understood about herself only 3 nights before, took what he offered with a desperation that frightened her even as her body sang with a satisfaction unlike anything she'd known as merely human. The taste of it steadied her, slowly, the wild edges of the hunger softening into something she could, with visible effort, begin to hold rather than be held by. When she finally drew back, breathing out of habit rather than need, the world had stopped roaring quite so loudly, and she found herself looking at her own hands in the candlelight with something between horror and astonishment.
I can see every thread in this blanket. I can hear Hesper's heartbeat 2 floors away. I don't know who I am right now.
You're exactly who you were 3 nights ago, carrying considerably more than you were carrying then. That takes time to feel true. It will. I promise you it will.
She looked down at her own hands again, steadier now, and found beneath the strangeness the same capable hands that had carried wine trays and pressed flowers and gripped a sword hilt when it mattered. Hers, still, simply now carrying more than they once had. Zbigniew and the magistrate came at dawn's first gray light to witness the turning's formal completion, Christian a quiet presence just behind them, and Wren, still learning the shape of her own new strength, rose to meet them on legs that felt, for the first time in 3 nights, entirely steady beneath her.
Welcome, girl. Fully, properly, on your own terms this time.
I don't think I would have survived any of this without you. Any part of it. The archive, the ledger, Wolfharbor, all of it.
You would have found a way regardless. I've simply had the privilege of watching you find it. That has been considerably more rewarding than most of what I've spent the last several centuries doing, if I'm honest.
The magistrate confirmed the turning complete and lawfully witnessed, closing with those words the very last thread the coven's investigation had ever held open regarding Wren's own fate. She said, before withdrawing to prepare her own departure from Sepulchretop at last, that she had rarely witnessed a turning entered into so plainly, so deliberately, and that she suspected this particular story would be remembered in coven records considerably more kindly than most. Christian spoke last, his old voice steady in a way it hadn't quite managed since his arrival. Christian said that he intended to petition the coven for his own restoration now, using this very story, a debt finally paid honestly, a wrong finally answered, as proof that old exiles could still, occasionally, find their way back to something resembling a life. He said he would not have believed that possible 3 weeks ago, and that he owed the believing, in no small part, to a servant girl who had written him a letter she had no obligation to write at all. Hesper found her within the hour, hesitating only a moment in the doorway before crossing the room without any hesitation at all.
You look the same. Mostly, your eyes are different. Otherwise, still entirely you.
I feel like considerably more of myself than I expected to, honestly. Frightening and strange and somehow still exactly me.
Good. I'd have been furious if becoming a vampire made you insufferable.
I promise to remain exactly as insufferable as I was before. No more, no less.
That's all I ask. Though I do intend to make you promise never to sneak up on me the way you apparently can now. I nearly dropped an entire tray this morning when I realized you'd cross the whole kitchen without a single footstep.
I'll work on announcing myself. Old habits apparently don't disappear just because everything else did.
Hesper pulled her into an embrace that Wren, still learning the careful new strength in her own arms, returned with more caution than she'd ever needed before, grateful, in that small, unremarkable moment, for a friendship that had survived a season neither of them could have predicted when it began with nothing more complicated than two servants sharing an early morning walk. Lubomira offered a rare, unguarded smile of her own, and Christian, watching from a respectful distance, said only that he was glad, deeply and simply glad, to have lived long enough to see a story like this one end the way it had. That evening, Emerich found Wren on the north battlement one final time, the same place they'd stood through nearly every turn this long season had thrown at them. And this time, for the first time, neither of them stood there waiting for anything at all.
No provisional standing. No coven ruling left to fear. No debt owed to anyone but ourselves.
Just us. Finally, actually, entirely just us.
He drew her close beneath a sky she could now see with a clarity no human eyes had ever given her, stars sharp and countless overhead. The frost-silvered spires of Sepulchretop spread quiet and settled below them, a kingdom no longer holding its breath.
I loved you as a mortal woman who might have been taken from me by nothing more than time. I love you now as something that gets to stay. I find I don't know how to measure which love was larger. I suspect it was always simply the same love, learning new ways to be certain of itself.
Then let's spend the considerable time we apparently have finding out together.
Below them, in the castle's quieter halls, the household was already settling into whatever came after an ending this large, Hesper teaching herself not to flinch at how quickly Wren could now cross a room, Lubomira drafting the first of what would surely be many careful reports to her own house, about a season no one at court would ever fully stop discussing, Zbigniew sitting with Christian over a shared cup of wine neither of them particularly needed to drink, simply glad, both of them, for company that asked nothing complicated of either. Room particularly needed to drink. Simply glad, both of that badass to me rowdy, mate.
Do you think it's really over? All of it?
This part is. I've learned better than to promise you nothing will ever come again. I can promise you that whatever does, we face it exactly the way we finally learned to face everything else.
Together.
Together. That word stopped being provisional the moment you chose it freely, and I don't intend to let it become anything less.